strangest part is that I was invited, not by someone I knew, obviously. The message just appeared in my university email one morning, buried between assignment reminders and spam about student loans. The subject line was blank, and the sender was just a string of random letters and numbers that looked like someone had mashed their keyboard. I almost deleted it without opening it. Would have, probably, if I hadn't been procrastinating on my dissertation about media psychology. Instead, I clicked it while eating cereal and half watching morning television. The email contained a single line of text and what looked like a web address, though not one I recognized. The text was simple enough. You've been selected for exclusive access. Interest in human behavior noted. That last bit made me pause. My dissertation was about online behavior and digital voyeurism, something I'd been researching for months. I'd written papers on it, posted about it in academic forums, even given a presentation to my media studies class. Someone had clearly been paying attention to my work. I'm not stupid. I knew this was probably some sort of scam or phishing attempt, but the timing was too coincidental to ignore, and curiosity has always been my weakness. I copied the address and decided to investigate. The link didn't work in my normal browser. After some trial and error, I realized I needed different software to access it. It took me most of the afternoon to figure out the technical side, but eventually I found myself staring at a basic web page with a dark background and minimal text. "Welcome," it said. "Your academic interest in observational behavior has been noted. Please confirm your identity to proceed." Below that was a form asking for basic details. Nothing too personal, just my name, age, and location. I hesitated for a long moment before filling it out. After all, if this was related to my research, it might actually be useful for my dissertation. The next page was more interesting. It explained that I was being granted access to what it called live behavioral studies, real-time observations of human subjects in various scenarios. The text was clinical and academic in tone, describing these as opportunities to witness genuine human reactions under stress. It sounded like exactly the sort of thing that would be invaluable for my research, assuming it was legitimate. The page also mentioned that access was limited and that sessions were scheduled at specific times. A timetable showed several slots over the coming week, each lasting about an hour. I bookmarked the page and spent the next day thinking about it. On one hand, it could be a genuine research opportunity. On the other, it could be anything from a student prank to something more sinister. But my dissertation deadline was approaching, and I needed fresh material. The first session was scheduled for that Thursday evening. I logged in about 10 minutes early, not sure what to expect. The page had changed to show a simple black screen with a timer counting down from 5 minutes. Below that was a text box where I could apparently type messages, though I wasn't sure who would see them. When the timer reached 0, the black screen was replaced by what looked like a live video feed. The image quality wasn't great, and the lighting was dim, but I could make out what appeared to be a small room with concrete walls. A single chair sat in the center, currently empty. Other viewers had apparently joined the session. Messages began appearing in the text box, short comments and observations that suggested people were treating this as some sort of academic exercise. Someone mentioned psychological stress responses. Another person referenced behavioral studies they'd read about. Then someone entered the room on screen. They were wearing ordinary clothes and moved hesitantly, looking around as if unsure where they were supposed to be. When they sat in the chair, I could see they appeared uncomfortable, shifting frequently, and glancing toward what I assumed was a camera. The messages from other viewers became more analytical. Comments about body language, stress indicators, fight or flight responses. It felt like watching a psychology experiment, though I couldn't understand what the actual study was supposed to measure. After about 20 minutes, another person entered the frame. This individual moved with more purpose, carrying what looked like a clipboard or notepad. They began asking questions that I couldn't hear, but the seated person's reactions were visible enough. Increasing agitation, attempts to get up from the chair, obvious distress. The academic tone of the viewer comments started to shift. People were noting the ethical implications of the study, questioning the consent processes, wondering about the institutional review board approval. I found myself typing similar concerns. But then something changed in the room. The person with the clipboard set it aside and picked up something else. Even through the poor video quality, I could see the seated individual's reaction was immediate and intense. Pure terror. The viewer messages became more urgent. People were demanding to know what institution was running this study, what the protocols were, whether there were safety measures in place. But no one seemed to be responding to our concerns. I watched for another 10 minutes before I couldn't take it anymore. Whatever this was, it wasn't a legitimate academic study. I closed the browser and tried to convince myself that what I'd seen had been some sort of performance art or elaborate role-play scenario. But I couldn't stop thinking about the fear in that person's eyes. I didn't log in again for several days. Instead, I tried to focus on my dissertation, using more conventional research sources and avoiding the strange website entirely. But the images from that session kept creeping back into my thoughts, and I found myself wondering what had happened after I'd logged off. The next scheduled session was the following Tuesday. Despite my better judgment, I found myself logging in again, telling myself I needed to understand what I'd witnessed before I could put it behind me. This time, the room was different, larger, with better lighting, and what looked like medical equipment visible in the background. The setup felt more professional, more organized. The viewer count was higher too. Apparently, word was spreading about these sessions. The subject who entered this room was clearly distressed from the moment they appeared on screen. They were looking around frantically, trying door handles that didn't seem to open, calling out to someone I couldn't see. The academic comments from viewers had disappeared entirely, replaced by expressions of shock and demands for explanation. That's when I realized what I was actually watching. These weren't psychology experiments or behavioral studies. These were something else entirely. Something that had been disguised as academic research to attract viewers like me. People whose legitimate interest in human behavior could be exploited. I should have left immediately. Should have closed my laptop and reported what I'd seen to the police. But instead, I found myself transfixed by the horror of it all. The realization that I'd been deliberately targeted, specifically chosen because of my academic interests, made it feel personal in a way that was hard to ignore. The person running these sessions had studied my work, identified me as someone who might be interested in observing human behavior, and then systematically drawn me in with appeals to my academic curiosity. I'd been manipulated, and the manipulation had worked perfectly. Over the following weeks, I continued logging into the sessions. Not because I wanted to see what happened. The content was disturbing enough that I often found myself looking away from the screen, but because I needed to understand the scope of what I'd stumbled into. Each session featured a different room, a different setup, different individuals. But the pattern was always the same. Someone would be brought into the space, clearly against their will, and then subjected to experiences that became progressively more disturbing. The viewer base seemed to be growing steadily. Comments suggested that people were sharing access with others, spreading the links through various channels. But what struck me most was how many viewers seemed to have been recruited the same way I had, through appeals to academic or professional interests. There were psychology students like myself, but also medical students, sociology researchers, and people working in law enforcement or social services. All of us had been identified as individuals whose legitimate professional interests could be used to justify initial access. It was a brilliant recruitment strategy, really. Rather than trying to find people who were actively seeking out disturbing content, they targeted those of us who might have valid reasons for wanting to observe human behavior under stress. Our professional credentials gave us cover, even to ourselves. I started keeping notes about the sessions, documenting what I observed and trying to identify patterns. I told myself this was evidence gathering, that I was building a case to present to the authorities. But really, I think I was just trying to make sense of my own complicity. Because that's what it was, ultimately, complicity. Every time I logged in, every minute I spent watching, I was participating in something terrible. The fact that I'd been manipulated into it didn't change the reality of my involvement. The sessions began to feel routine after a while. I'd recognize certain rooms that appeared repeatedly, suggesting these weren't one-off events, but part of some ongoing operation. The timing seemed coordinated too. Sessions in different rooms would start at staggered intervals, allowing viewers to move between them. But what disturbed me most was how normal it all started to feel. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a kind of numb fascination. I'd find myself critiquing the camera angles or noting technical details rather than focusing on what was actually happening to the people on screen. That normalization was perhaps the most frightening aspect of the whole experience. How quickly something horrific could become just another part of my routine. How easily I could compartmentalize it, separating my normal life from these evening sessions where I'd watch unspeakable things unfold. About 6 weeks after that first session, something changed. I logged in as usual, but instead of the familiar room selection screen, I was greeted by a different message. "Thank you for your participation in our observational study," it read. "Your engagement has been noted and appreciated. You have been selected for advanced access privileges." Below that was a new set of options I hadn't seen before. Different types of sessions, different levels of access, different ways to participate. The language was still clinical and academic, but the implications were clear enough. I was being offered the chance to move from passive observer to active participant. The message explained that my consistent attendance and demonstrated interest qualified me for what they called collaborative sessions, events where viewers could provide input and direction rather than simply observing. The language made it sound like a natural progression, the next step in an ongoing research project. But I knew better by then. This wasn't about research or academic study. This was about gradually drawing people deeper into something terrible, using their initial curiosity as a hook to secure their continued involvement. The truly disturbing part was how tempting the offer was. After weeks of watching passively, the idea of having some control over what happened was oddly appealing. Not because I wanted to cause harm, but because the powerlessness of being just an observer had become its own form of torture. I stared at that message for nearly an hour before closing the browser without responding. But I kept thinking about it over the following days. The progression they were offering felt inevitable, like a path I'd been on since that first invitation email. That's when I finally understood the full scope of what I'd encountered. This wasn't just about providing content for people who were already predisposed to watch it. It was about creating those people, gradually converting ordinary individuals into active participants through careful manipulation and escalation. They'd identified me as someone with legitimate academic interests, drawn me in with appeals to those interests, normalized my participation through repeated exposure, and then offered me a path to deeper involvement. Each step had felt logical and justifiable at the time. How many others had received similar invitations? How many had progressed further down this path than I had? And how many people who ended up in those rooms had started as viewers, gradually drawn into participation through the same process I'd experienced? I deleted all the bookmarks and access software from my computer that night, tried to put the whole experience behind me and focus on finishing my dissertation through conventional research methods. But the questions wouldn't leave me alone. 3 months later, I received another email. Different sender, different format, but the same basic message. I'd been selected for access to exclusive content based on my demonstrated interest in human behavior. This time, they were offering access to what they called historical archives, recordings of previous sessions that I could review at my own pace. I deleted the email immediately, but the fact that it had found me again, despite my efforts to distance myself from the whole thing, was deeply unsettling. Somehow, my participation in those sessions had marked me permanently. I was now part of their recruitment database, someone to be contacted periodically with new opportunities for involvement. That was nearly a year ago now. I've received 4 more emails since then, each offering different types of access, different levels of participation. The language has evolved slightly each time, becoming more sophisticated in its appeals to my academic interests. I've deleted them all without opening the links, but I'll admit that the temptation is still there. The curiosity that got me involved in the first place hasn't disappeared, and part of me wonders what I might have missed by stepping away. That's the most frightening realization of all. Not that such things exist, or that people participate in them, but how easily I could have become one of those participants. How the right combination of manipulation and escalation could turn someone like me, someone who considers themselves ethical and rational, into an active collaborator in something terrible. The dissertation I eventually submitted focused on digital manipulation and the psychology of online recruitment. I got a first-class mark and several offers for postgraduate study, but I declined them all. The idea of pursuing further research into human behavior no longer appeals to me the way it once did, because I know now how that interest can be used against you, how academic curiosity can become a vulnerability, exploited by people who understand exactly how to identify and target individuals like me. The emails still come occasionally, usually around the time of academic deadlines or conference seasons, when students and researchers might be most desperate for new material. The timing is never coincidental. I wonder sometimes about the other people who were in those viewer sessions with me, whether they received similar follow-up invitations, whether any of them accepted the offers for increased participation, whether some of the people I saw in later sessions had started as viewers themselves. The thought keeps me awake some nights. The possibility that I witnessed people who had started exactly where I did, drawn in by the same appeals to academic interest, gradually manipulated into deeper involvement until they found themselves on the other side of the camera. I tell myself I made the right choice by walking away, but part of me will always wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd accepted those offers for advanced access, whether I would have had the strength to resist the gradual escalation, or whether I would have become something I never thought I could be. That uncertainty is perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the whole experience. The knowledge that the line between observer and participant between victim and perpetrator might be thinner than any of us would like to believe. The latest email arrived just yesterday. Same pattern, different wording. They're still out there, still recruiting, still finding new ways to identify and exploit people's legitimate interests for terrible purposes. I deleted it like all the others, but for just a moment, I hesitated before clicking delete. And that hesitation terrifies me more than anything I saw in those sessions. I never meant to find it. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. It started with a conversation at work. I was having lunch with a colleague from the IT department who'd been going on about online privacy and government surveillance. Nothing particularly radical, just the usual complaints about data collection and targeted advertising that everyone seems to have these days. But then he mentioned something about encrypted networks and hidden services that caught my attention. I'm not particularly tech savvy, mind you. I work in marketing for a small firm in Birmingham, and my computer skills extend about as far as PowerPoint presentations and the occasional Excel spreadsheet. But something about what he'd said intrigued me. The idea that there was this entire hidden layer of the internet that most people never even knew existed, running parallel to our normal browsing. He'd been quite vague about the details, probably assuming I wouldn't be interested or wouldn't understand the technical aspects. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself researching it later that evening. It took me the better part of a week to figure out how to access these hidden networks. I won't go into the technical details because, frankly, I barely understood them myself. But after following various online guides and downloading the necessary software, I finally found myself staring at a very basic-looking browser window that promised access to this shadowy corner of the web. The first few sites I visited were disappointingly mundane. Forums discussing privacy rights, marketplaces selling things that were questionable but hardly shocking, and a lot of political discussion that seemed more paranoid than dangerous. It was all rather anticlimactic, to be honest. I'd expected something more sinister, more obviously criminal. But then I stumbled across a link buried deep in one of the forums. It was just a string of random characters with no description, posted by someone with an equally meaningless username. Something about its anonymity made me curious enough to click. The page that loaded was stark black with red text. No fancy graphics, no navigation menu, just a simple message. Live rooms available, premium access only. Below that was a list of what looked like room numbers, each with a small viewer count next to it. Most showed 0 or 1 viewer, but a few had numbers in the teens or 20s. I clicked on one of the rooms with a moderate viewer count, expecting perhaps some sort of chat room or video conference. Instead, I was met with a login screen requesting payment details for what it called viewing privileges. The amounts weren't astronomical, but they weren't trivial either. About what you might spend on a decent meal out. Common sense should have kicked in at that point. I should have closed the browser and forgotten about the whole thing. But curiosity is a powerful motivator, and I found myself entering my card details before I'd really thought it through. The room I entered appeared to be someone's living space, filmed from a fixed camera angle in the corner. It wasn't particularly interesting at first glance. A sofa, a coffee table, some bookshelves. The lighting was dim, and the image quality wasn't great. I began to wonder what exactly I was paying to watch. Then I noticed the timer in the corner of the screen, counting down from what looked like about 40 minutes, and below that, a chat box where viewers could apparently send messages. Most of them seemed to be requests or suggestions, though I couldn't quite make sense of what they were referring to. I was about to leave when a figure entered the frame. They were wearing dark clothing and moved with deliberate, measured steps. What struck me immediately was how they seemed to acknowledge the camera, looking directly at it and nodding slightly, as if greeting the viewers. The person moved to the coffee table and began arranging items on its surface. Even through the grainy video feed, I could see they were being very methodical about it. Tools of some sort laid out in precise rows. The chat activity increased dramatically during this process, with messages appearing faster than I could read them. That's when I began to understand what I was watching. The room had another occupant, someone sitting in a chair that had been just outside the camera's view, until the first person adjusted its angle slightly. This second individual appeared to be restrained, though the poor video quality made it difficult to be certain of details. My finger hovered over the close button on my browser. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to shut this down and never think about it again. But I found myself frozen, unable to look away from the screen. The timer continued counting down. The chat messages became increasingly specific and disturbing, and the person in dark clothing continued their methodical preparations, occasionally glancing at the camera as if checking on their audience. I want to say that I closed the browser immediately, that I reported what I'd seen to the police and tried to forget about the whole experience. But that wouldn't be entirely truthful. I watched for another 10 minutes before finally managing to close the window. 10 minutes during which I witnessed things that I still can't properly process, let alone describe. 10 minutes that have fundamentally changed how I see the world around me. The worst part wasn't even what I saw, though that was horrific enough. It was the realization of how easily I'd found it, how simple the payment process had been, and how many other viewers were in that room with me. People just like me, presumably, sitting in their homes and choosing to watch something unspeakable unfold in real time. I deleted all the software from my computer that night and tried to convince myself it had all been some sort of elaborate fake. Special effects, actors, a sick form of entertainment designed to shock gullible viewers. But deep down, I knew better. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some invisible line that I could never uncross. I'd become complicit in something terrible simply by being a witness to it. But worse than the guilt was the curiosity that lingered. Questions that I couldn't get out of my head. Who were those people? Where was that room? Were there others? How many others? It took me nearly a week to resist the urge to log back in. When I finally did, the site had changed. The room I'd visited was no longer on the list, replaced by others with different numbers but similar viewer counts. The black and red interface was exactly the same, as was the payment system. It was as if nothing had happened, as if what I'd witnessed had been just another evening's entertainment that was now archived somewhere in the digital ether. I clicked on a different room this time, then another. Each one showed a similar setup, a fixed camera angle, a timer, a chat box, and eventually the same type of methodical preparation I'd seen before. The third room I visited was different though. The camera angle was wider, showing more of the space. It looked like a basement or cellar with concrete walls and harsh lighting. Multiple chairs were visible in the frame, though only one was occupied initially. As I watched, more figures entered the room. They moved with the same deliberate precision I'd observed before, but there were more of them this time. The chat activity exploded as viewers reacted to this development, and I found myself reading messages that made my stomach turn. The timer for this room showed nearly 2 hours remaining. I realized then that this wasn't just some sick individual operating alone. This was organized, professional. There were multiple locations, multiple performers, and clearly multiple audiences willing to pay for access. The scale of it hit me like a physical blow. How many rooms were there? How many viewers? How long had this been going on? And most disturbingly, how had it remained hidden for so long if access was this straightforward? I started keeping a notebook after that, documenting room numbers, viewer counts, and any details I could discern about the locations. I told myself I was gathering evidence, that I'd eventually find a way to report this to the authorities. But really, I think I was just trying to make sense of something that defied comprehension. The rooms seemed to operate on different schedules. Some were active during typical evening hours in the UK. Others seemed timed for different zones entirely. The production values varied as well. Some were clearly amateur setups with poor lighting and single cameras, while others showed signs of more sophisticated equipment and planning. What remained consistent was the audience participation element. Viewers could influence what happened through the chat system, though I never fully understood the mechanics of how requests were prioritized or implemented. There seemed to be some sort of hierarchy among the viewers, with certain usernames appearing to carry more weight than others. I began recognizing regular participants, usernames that appeared across multiple rooms, sometimes making similar requests or comments. It was like discovering a community of people united by their shared interest in witnessing these events. A community that I was now, technically, part of. The realization made me physically ill. But I kept watching, night after night, room after room. I told myself I was documenting evidence, but I knew that was just an excuse. The truth was that I'd become addicted to the horror of it, addicted to being witness to things that most people couldn't even imagine existed. The rooms began to feel familiar. I started recognizing certain locations that appeared repeatedly, suggesting these weren't random one-off events. Some rooms seemed to have regular schedules, with timers appearing at predictable intervals. Others were more sporadic, popping up without warning and disappearing just as quickly. I also began to notice patterns in the chat conversations. Certain phrases that seemed to have specific meanings, references to other sites that I didn't dare investigate, and occasionally discussions about meeting in person, though these messages would disappear quickly. Someone was clearly watching the conversations. Someone was controlling who could access these rooms, taking the payments, and presumably organizing what happened in them. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. 3 weeks into my nightly visits, something happened that changed everything. I was watching a room that had become one of my regular stops, a space that looked like a converted garage, with medical equipment visible in the background. The timer showed about 30 minutes remaining when a new figure entered the frame. This person was different from the usual performers. They moved hesitantly, looking around as if confused or disoriented. And when they turned toward the camera, I could see their face clearly for the first time. I recognized them, not personally, but from the news. It was someone who'd been reported missing from Manchester about a month earlier. A university student whose disappearance had made the local headlines and prompted police appeals for information. The room's chat exploded with activity as other viewers apparently made the same connection. Messages referencing news articles, speculating about timelines, discussing the implications. Some viewers seemed excited by this development, while others expressed concern about the increased risk. I sat staring at my screen, paralyzed by the implications of what I was seeing. This wasn't just some underground entertainment network. These were real people. People who were being held against their will, people whose families were presumably still hoping for their safe return. I should have called the police immediately, should have screenshot everything, documented the room details, and handed it all over to the authorities. But instead, I found myself continuing to watch, transfixed by the horror of it all. The missing student was clearly distressed, looking around the room frantically and trying to communicate with someone off camera. The usual methodical preparations began, but this time they seemed different, more urgent. The chat discussion had shifted as well, with viewers debating whether this level of publicity was worth the risk. 20 minutes into the session, something unprecedented happened. The feed cut out abruptly, replaced by a simple error message. The room disappeared from the available list, and when I tried to access it again, I received a message saying it was no longer available. The chat was buzzing with speculation about what had gone wrong. Some viewers suggested technical difficulties, others worried about police intervention. A few seemed angry about losing access to what they'd paid for. But within an hour, the room was back online with a different number and what appeared to be a completely different setup. The missing student was nowhere to be seen, and the usual proceedings continued as if nothing had happened. I never saw that particular individual again in any of the rooms I visited. Whether they'd been moved to a different location, or whether something worse had happened, I have no way of knowing. But their brief appearance had shattered any remaining illusions I'd maintained about the nature of what I was witnessing. These weren't volunteers or actors. These were victims. I stopped taking notes after that night, stopped trying to convince myself that I was gathering evidence for some future police report. Instead, I simply watched, night after night, consumed by a fascination that I knew was deeply wrong but couldn't seem to break. The rooms continued to operate with clockwork precision. New locations appeared regularly, while others disappeared without explanation. The viewer counts remained steady, suggesting a stable audience for this content, and the chat discussions continued to reveal the depth of this underground community. I began to wonder about the other viewers. Who were they? Where did they live? What did they do during the day before logging in to watch these sessions? Were they people I might know, might work with, might pass on the street? The anonymity of it all was perhaps the most disturbing aspect. Everyone was hidden behind usernames, participating in something horrific, while maintaining their normal lives in the physical world. I was doing the same thing after all. During the day, I'd sit in meetings at work, discussing marketing strategies and quarterly targets, all while knowing that I'd be spending my evening watching things that would probably result in prison sentences for everyone involved. The disconnect was surreal. My sleep became increasingly erratic. When I did manage to drift off, I'd have vivid dreams about the rooms I'd visited, the faces I'd seen, the conversations I'd read. I'd wake up feeling complicit, as if I'd been physically present for these events rather than just watching from behind a screen. The guilt was overwhelming, but not enough to make me stop. It's been nearly 2 months now since I first found that initial link. I've seen things that I'll never be able to forget, learned things about human nature that I wish I could unlearn. And yet, most nights, I still find myself opening that familiar black browser window and navigating to those hidden corners of the internet. I tell myself I'll report it eventually, that I'll find the courage to contact the authorities and provide whatever information I can. But I know I won't, because doing so would mean admitting my own role in all of this, my own complicity in what amounts to a form of digital voyeurism of the worst kind. The most terrifying realization is how easy it all is, how simple it was to access, how straightforward the payment system, how seamlessly it all operates alongside the normal internet that everyone else uses. If I could stumble across it so easily, how many others are doing the same thing? How many people are out there right now, watching these rooms, participating in this community? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many more rooms are there that I haven't found yet? The timer in the corner of my current room shows 14 minutes remaining. The chat is active as usual, filled with the same types of requests and comments I've become accustomed to reading. Another evening for an audience of anonymous viewers, each of us safely hidden behind our screens, pretending that what we're witnessing isn't real. But it is real, and tomorrow night, I'll probably be back here again, watching another room, seeing another victim, being part of something that exists in the shadows of our connected world. I never meant to find it, but now that I have, I can't seem to look away. It's funny how sometimes a single scene in a terrible film can completely destroy your life. I was 16, sprawled across Chloe's bedroom floor during one of our regular Friday night sleepovers, half watching some forgettable thriller she'd found on Netflix. We were painting our nails and complaining about college drama when this one scene came on. The protagonist accidentally accessing a live stream where someone was being tortured. Real torture, not movie violence. The camera lingered on the victim's face for what felt like ages, whilst anonymous viewers typed commands in a chat box beside the video. Chloe made some joke about how unrealistic it was, but I couldn't stop thinking about that terrified expression, about whether places like that actually existed. The next Monday at college, I found myself asking our media studies teacher about it during lunch break. Mr. Henderson was one of those lecturers who actually seemed to know about real-world technology, not just textbook theory. When I mentioned the film and asked whether such things actually existed, his expression changed completely. He told me to forget about it, that curiosity about certain corners of the internet could lead to serious trouble. That response only made me more interested. I'd always been the type to pick at loose threads until the whole thing unraveled. When I was younger, it was taking apart radios and mobile phones to see how they worked. As I got older, it became researching topics that other people seemed reluctant to discuss. The dark web fell into that category perfectly, something adults whispered about but never properly explained. My research started innocently enough. I spent hours reading articles about online privacy, digital anonymity, and the history of encrypted networks. Most sources treated the subject academically, discussing the legitimate uses for secure browsing and the importance of protecting digital freedom. But buried within these discussions were casual references to more sinister applications. The technical setup was surprisingly straightforward. Within a week of starting my research, I'd managed to access the hidden networks that everyone talked about, but few seemed to have actually visited. My parents worked long hours. Mum as a nurse at Queen's Medical Centre, Dad managing a small engineering firm, so I had plenty of unsupervised time at home to explore. Initially, the dark web was disappointing. Most sites looked amateurish, with basic layouts and minimal content. I found forums discussing digital privacy, marketplaces selling questionable goods, and endless political discussions. Nothing particularly shocking or dangerous, just people who preferred anonymity for their online activities. But I kept digging deeper. The first hint of something more serious came through a forum dedicated to extreme content. Users discussed videos and streams that weren't available through conventional platforms, sharing links and recommendations for increasingly disturbing material. The conversations were coded, using euphemisms and references that took me weeks to decode. Red rooms were mentioned occasionally, always in hushed, reverent tones. According to the discussions I found, these were live streams where viewers could watch and sometimes direct real violence against unwilling participants. Most users claimed they were urban legends, elaborate hoaxes designed to frighten newcomers. But a few insisted they were real, sharing cryptic instructions for accessing genuine broadcasts. The more I read, the more convinced I became that something authentic existed beneath all the speculation and mythology. Users would reference specific streams, discussing technical details and sharing reactions that seemed too genuine to be fabricated. There was a consistency to their accounts that suggested shared experiences rather than collaborative fiction. After nearly a month of research, I finally gained access to a private forum that claimed to host legitimate Red Room broadcasts. The verification process was extensive, requiring proof of serious interest and understanding of digital security protocols. I had to demonstrate my knowledge of encryption, provide references from other underground communities, and pass several tests designed to weed out casual browsers and potential law enforcement. The forum itself was unlike anything I'd encountered in my weeks of exploration. Professional looking, well organized, with strict rules about behavior and content sharing. Users were required to maintain consistent personas, contribute meaningfully to discussions, and demonstrate ongoing commitment to the community. This wasn't a place for tourists or thrill seekers. Live broadcasts were announced days in advance, with detailed information about technical requirements and viewing protocols. The descriptions were deliberately vague, referring to interactive experiences and immersive content without explicitly stating what viewers would witness. But the anticipation in the forums was obvious. Users discussing upcoming streams with an excitement that made my stomach turn. I told myself I was conducting research, satisfying academic curiosity about a phenomenon I'd only read about. Part of me still believed these broadcasts would turn out to be elaborate hoaxes, carefully staged performances designed to convince gullible viewers. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was genuinely excited about the possibility of witnessing something real and forbidden. The first stream I attended was scheduled for a Wednesday evening. I waited until my parents had gone to bed, then settled in my bedroom with my laptop and a pair of headphones. The technical setup was more complex than regular streaming, requiring specific software and connection protocols. By the time everything was configured properly, I was sweating despite the cool October weather. The broadcast began precisely at midnight. Unlike the grainy, amateurish content I'd expected, the image quality was exceptional. Multiple camera angles showed what appeared to be a basement or cellar, professionally lit and equipped with various items I couldn't immediately identify. The production values rivaled anything on mainstream television. A figure wearing dark clothing and a simple mask entered the frame, moving with methodical precision as they prepared the space for whatever was about to happen. They never spoke directly to the camera, but occasionally gestured towards specific areas or objects, suggesting they were aware of the viewing audience. Then the victim was brought in. I use that word deliberately now, though at the time I couldn't bring myself to think of them that way. They appeared confused, disoriented, looking around the space as if trying to understand their situation. They seemed to be about my age, maybe slightly older, with the kind of ordinary appearance that made them feel real rather than like an actor in a performance. What followed was the systematic destruction of another human being. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly and deliberately, with clear attention to the viewing audience's presumed preferences. The masked figure would occasionally pause to check messages from viewers, sometimes adjusting their approach based on suggestions or requests. I should have stopped watching immediately, Should have closed the laptop and tried to forget what I'd seen. Instead, I found myself transfixed, unable to look away from something I knew was fundamentally wrong. The professional presentation, the interactive elements, the victim's genuine terror, everything confirmed that this wasn't a performance or simulation. The stream continued for nearly 3 hours. By the end, I was physically sick and shaking uncontrollably. The person who had entered the frame confused and frightened was no longer moving. The masked figure began methodically cleaning the space, removing evidence of what had occurred with the same professional efficiency they'd shown throughout. In the final minutes, the figure addressed the camera directly. Though their voice was digitally altered, they thanked viewers for their participation and announced that the next live broadcast was already being planned. They mentioned that premium subscribers would receive access to archived content and special interactive features. The stream ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a blank screen in my darkened bedroom. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of my neighborhood. Cars passing, a dog barking, the hum of street lights, normal sounds from a normal Tuesday night in a normal suburb. But nothing felt normal anymore. I didn't attend college the next day, or the day after that. When I finally returned, everything seemed different. Conversations with friends felt hollow and meaningless. Lessons about media literacy and digital citizenship took on sinister new meanings. I found myself studying my classmates and teachers, wondering what darkness might lurk beneath their ordinary facades. The forum sent me several messages over the following weeks, automated notifications about upcoming streams, invitations to participate in community discussions, offers to upgrade my membership status for access to exclusive content. I ignored them all, but I never deleted my account or blocked the communications. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to move on, focus on my A-levels, think about university applications. I changed my browsing habits, deleted software I'd installed, even convinced my parents to upgrade our home internet security. I told myself these were practical precautions, unrelated to what I'd witnessed online. But the images haven't faded. If anything, they've become more vivid over time. Not just the violence, though that was horrific enough, but the realization of my own complicity. The knowledge that I'd sat through the entire broadcast without attempting to help or intervene. I've started noticing things around Nottingham that I hadn't seen before. Vans parked in residential areas with tinted windows and multiple aerials. People who seem to be observing rather than simply passing through. Buildings with more security cameras than their apparent purpose would justify. Probably just paranoia, the result of knowing what kinds of activities are hidden beneath the surface of normal life. Last week, I received a package at our house. No return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a small webcam and a handwritten note with a local address. The note simply said, "Ready for the next level. Thursday 11 p.m. I threw the camera in my bedroom bin immediately, but I memorized the address before disposing of the note. The location is in one of the industrial areas near the canal, somewhere I'd never had reason to visit. I looked it up online. It's registered as storage units, the kind of place people rent when they need extra space for furniture or business equipment. Nothing suspicious about it, at least not on the surface. I keep telling myself I won't go, that I'll ignore the invitation and focus on my coursework, my university applications, my plans for a normal future. But Thursday is tomorrow night, and I know exactly how to get to that address on the night buses. The webcam is back on my desk now. I retrieved it from the bin this morning, telling myself I just wanted to examine it more closely. It's a high-quality device, the kind that would produce professional-looking footage in the right lighting conditions. I haven't decided anything yet, but I know that something fundamental changed the night I watched that stream. The boundaries I thought were permanent turned out to be more flexible than I'd imagined. And once you cross certain lines, even as an observer, it becomes increasingly difficult to remember why those boundaries existed in the first place. My parents are working late tomorrow. Mum has a night shift. Dad has some crisis at the engineering firm. The house will be empty from about 7 o'clock onwards. Plenty of time to travel across the city and back without anyone noticing my absence. The worst part isn't the fear of what might happen if I go. It's the growing certainty that I want to find out what comes next. That the viewer I was 6 months ago isn't satisfied with watching anymore. Thursday night is 12 hours away. The redundancy letter came on a Tuesday. After nearly 8 years managing the procurement department at a manufacturing firm in Sheffield, I found myself with 3 months severance pay and absolutely no idea what to do with my time. My wife had left the previous autumn, something about needing space and finding herself. So it was just me rattling around our terraced house near Hillsborough, trying to make sense of what felt like my life falling apart. Unemployment benefit meetings became my only real human contact. The job centre appointments every fortnight, sitting across from advisors who looked barely old enough to vote, discussing my transferable skills and career objectives. Between those soul-crushing sessions, I filled my days with daytime television and long walks through the city centre, watching everyone else hurry to places they needed to be. That's when I started spending more time online. Not job hunting. I'd given up on that after the first month of automated rejection emails. Instead, I found myself drawn into forums and message boards, places where people discussed everything from conspiracy theories to urban exploration. It was on one of these communities that I first heard about the hidden parts of the internet, the areas that ordinary browsers couldn't reach. A user called darkmatter47 had posted about accessing restricted networks, claiming there were entire communities operating beyond normal search engines. The post was vague but intriguing, mentioning special software that could bypass conventional internet filters. Other users replied with technical terms I didn't understand, and references to places that sounded almost mythical. My curiosity got the better of me. I'd always been reasonably tech-savvy. Nothing professional, but enough to troubleshoot computer problems and set up home networks. Within a few hours of reading that initial post, I'd managed to access what they called the dark web. The process was surprisingly straightforward, once you knew what you were looking for. The first few weeks were disappointing. Most sites looked like they'd been designed in the late 90s, with basic layouts and poor navigation. I found marketplaces selling questionable goods, political forums full of paranoid rambling, and endless discussions about digital privacy. Nothing seemed particularly shocking or dangerous, just a collection of people who preferred anonymity. Then I discovered the streaming communities. It started with a link shared in a private message from someone who'd noticed my activity on various boards. The link led to a forum dedicated to exclusive content, videos and live streams that weren't available through conventional platforms. The description claimed these were raw, unfiltered broadcasts from around the world, the kind of footage that mainstream media wouldn't dare show. Most of the content was exactly what you'd expect. Grainy videos of protests, industrial accidents, medical procedures. the sort of thing that satisfied a morbid curiosity but wasn't particularly disturbing. Users would comment on the footage, discussing technical aspects or sharing similar experiences. It felt like being part of a secret documentary society. The live streams were different. These weren't recordings but real-time broadcasts, usually announced hours in advance with cryptic titles and brief descriptions. I started attending these sessions regularly, partly out of boredom and partly from a growing fascination with this hidden world. Most streams were mundane. Someone broadcasting from a construction site after hours, or footage from security cameras in empty office buildings. Occasionally, there would be something more interesting. Abandoned locations, restricted areas, or informal tours of places the public couldn't normally access. The chat alongside these streams was usually sparse, with viewers making brief technical comments or asking questions about locations. It was during my 3rd month of unemployment that I noticed a pattern emerging. Certain usernames appeared regularly in the more exclusive streams, and these users seemed to have access to content that required special invitations. They would reference private rooms and special sessions using language that suggested something beyond urban exploration or architectural voyeurism. One evening, a user called Streamwatcher sent me a private message. They'd noticed my regular participation and wondered if I might be interested in accessing premium content. The message was carefully worded, discussing immersive experiences and unique perspectives without explicitly stating what this involved. They explained that access required verification, not payment, but proof of genuine interest and discretion. The verification process took nearly a week. I had to provide details about my online activity, answer questions about my motivations, and demonstrate my understanding of digital security. Throughout this process, Streamwatcher remained professional but vague about what I was actually applying for. They mentioned that the content was intense and not suitable for casual viewers, but assured me that everything was legal and consensual. When my access was finally approved, I received instructions for joining a stream scheduled for the following Friday evening. The message included specific technical requirements and warned that recording or sharing content would result in immediate exclusion and potential consequences. The session was described as a live interactive experience, lasting approximately 2 hours. Friday arrived with typical British weather, persistent drizzle that had been falling since morning. I'd spent the day feeling increasingly nervous about the evening stream, unsure what I'd committed myself to. By the time the session was due to begin, I'd convinced myself it would probably be another disappointing urban exploration broadcast. The stream started promptly at 9 o'clock. Unlike previous sessions, this one had no visible chat function. Instead, viewers could send private messages to the host, who would occasionally respond by adjusting camera angles or moving to different areas of what appeared to be a basement or underground space. The image quality was excellent, far superior to the usual grainy footage I'd become accustomed to. The location looked like a converted cellar, with concrete walls and professional lighting equipment. A single figure wearing dark clothing moved through the frame, preparing various items on a metal table. Their face was never visible, either kept off camera or obscured by shadows. What happened next changed everything I thought I understood about human nature and my own moral boundaries. The figure gestured towards something outside the camera's view, and another person entered the frame. This individual appeared confused, uncertain, looking around the space as if trying to understand where they were. The host began what could only be described as a performance, but one that became increasingly disturbing as it progressed. What started as psychological intimidation gradually escalated into physical harassment. The confused person, I still can't bring myself to think of them as a victim, even though that's clearly what they were, seemed to realize their situation and began showing obvious signs of distress. I should have closed the browser immediately, should have reported what I was seeing to the authorities. Instead, I found myself frozen, unable to look away from something I knew was fundamentally wrong. The professional lighting, the multiple camera angles, the host's methodical approach, everything suggested this was far from spontaneous. Other viewers were clearly watching. Messages appeared on screen occasionally, brief comments from the host acknowledging specific usernames. Some messages contained suggestions or requests, which the host would sometimes implement. It became clear that this wasn't just a broadcast, but an interactive experience where viewers could influence what happened. The session continued for nearly 2 hours. By the end, I was physically sick and trembling uncontrollably. The person who had entered the frame confused and uncertain was no longer moving. The host calmly began cleaning the space, methodically removing evidence of what had occurred. In the final minutes, the host addressed the camera directly. Though their face remained hidden, they spoke clearly about the successful session and thanked viewers for their participation. They mentioned that recordings would be available through private channels and that the next live session was already being planned. The stream ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a blank screen in my darkened living room. Outside, the rain continued falling, and I could hear traffic passing on the main road. Normal sounds from a normal evening in a normal neighborhood. But nothing felt normal anymore. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments of what I'd witnessed. Not just the violence, though that was horrific enough, but my own inaction. The realization that I'd sat through the entire broadcast without attempting to help or intervene. The following week, I received another message from Streamwatcher. They thanked me for attending the session and asked for feedback on the experience. They mentioned that my viewing history suggested I was a committed participant and wondered if I'd be interested in more exclusive content. The message included links to archived sessions and information about becoming a premium member. I deleted the message without responding, but I didn't delete the links. That was 3 months ago. I found a new job, nothing exciting, just administrative work for the local council, and I'm slowly rebuilding some semblance of normal life. I changed internet providers, replaced my computer, even moved to a different area of the city. I told myself these were practical decisions, unrelated to what I'd seen online. But I still have those links. They're saved in a folder buried deep in my new computer's file system, hidden among dozens of other directories. I haven't accessed them, but I know they're there. Sometimes, late at night, when sleep won't come, I find myself navigating closer to that folder, my cursor hovering over the links. I've started noticing things around the city that I hadn't seen before. Vans parked in unusual locations, people who seem to be watching rather than simply waiting. Buildings with multiple security cameras that don't match their apparent purpose. Probably just paranoia, the result of knowing what kinds of activities are hidden beneath the surface of normal life. Yesterday, I received a package at my new address. No return details, just my name and the correct postcode written in careful block letters. Inside was a small wireless camera and a handwritten note with an address across town. The note simply said, "Your turn to contribute." Friday 9 p.m. I've thrown the camera away twice now. Both times, I've gone back to retrieve it from the bin. The address is in an area I don't know well, somewhere near the industrial estates on the outskirts of Sheffield. I looked it up online. It's registered as a storage facility, the kind of place people rent when they need extra space for household items or business equipment. I keep telling myself I won't go, that I'll ignore the invitation and carry on with my new job, my clean computer, my attempts at normal life. But Friday is tomorrow, and I know exactly how long it takes to drive to that address. The camera is sitting on my kitchen table now, next to my car keys. I haven't decided anything yet, but I know that something fundamental changed the night I watched that stream. The boundaries I thought were permanent turned out to be more flexible than I'd imagined. And once you cross certain lines, even as an observer, it becomes increasingly difficult to remember why those boundaries existed in the first place. The rain is starting again outside. Same persistent drizzle that was falling the night everything changed. In about 24 hours, I'll either be at home, trying to sleep through another night of guilt and confusion, or I'll be somewhere else entirely. The worst part isn't the fear of what might happen if I go. It's the fear of how much I want to find out. Most people think the worst things online happen suddenly, but the really dangerous stuff, it creeps in, disguised as curiosity. You follow one interesting link, then another, and before you know it, you're somewhere you never meant to be, talking to people who know far too much about you. I'm telling you this because I want someone to know what happened, even if I can't prove any of it. My name is Sarah. I'm 16, and I live in Whitstable with my dad. It's one of those seaside towns that's nice enough if you like fish and chips and tourists taking photos of old boats, but there's not much to do if you're my age. Most people my year spend their time on Instagram or TikTok, but I've never really seen the point. I prefer reading or walking along the beach when it's empty, or just thinking about things. The whole thing started during the Easter holidays this year. I'd been feeling restless, bored with the same routines and the same conversations with the same people. I wanted to understand things that felt more real than what I got at school or from the news. I suppose that's normal for someone my age, but it led me to start exploring parts of the internet I'd never bothered with before. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just following links from one site to another, reading forums about subjects I'd never heard of, watching videos that YouTube's algorithm would never have suggested. Some of it was genuinely interesting. Discussions about philosophy, science, politics that went deeper than surface-level opinions. Other stuff was clearly made by people with too much time and not enough sense. But there were other places as well. Sites that looked half abandoned. Forums where people discussed things in ways that felt deliberately vague, as if they were all speaking in code about something they couldn't mention directly. The posts had an odd quality to them, like everyone was performing for an audience that wasn't quite there. One forum in particular caught my attention. The design was basic, almost primitive, and most of the posts were short and cryptic. Users would share links that led to other sites, sometimes with brief comments that didn't really explain what you'd find there. There was something compelling about the mystery of it, the sense that you were seeing conversations about things that weren't meant for general consumption. I started visiting that forum regularly, not posting anything myself, but reading through the discussions and following the links that seemed interesting. Most led to dead ends or sites that had been taken down, but occasionally I'd find something that felt genuinely different from the usual internet content. Videos that looked like they'd been filmed secretly, documents that seemed to contain information someone probably didn't want to be public, discussions about activities that sounded both fascinating and vaguely troubling. The users seemed to know each other. Or at least they'd developed relationships over time. They'd reference previous conversations, share private jokes, and occasionally mention meeting up in person. There was a sense of community there, even if I couldn't quite understand what connected them all. After a few weeks of lurking, I started getting private messages. Nothing dramatic or obviously suspicious, just friendly contact from users who'd noticed I was reading their posts. One user in particular seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. They went by the name Alex, and their messages were thoughtful and articulate in a way that suggested someone older and more educated than the typical internet random. The conversations were intellectually stimulating in a way I didn't get from school or from talking to people my own age. Alex seemed to take my opinions seriously, would challenge my thinking without being condescending, and introduce me to ideas and websites I'd never have found on my own. In hindsight, every question had a purpose. They'd ask about my interests, my thoughts on philosophy and current events, what I was hoping to find in these obscure corners of the internet. Over time, the conversations became more personal. Alex would ask about my daily life, my family situation, my plans for the future. He made it feel like I was guiding the conversation, but I never was. I found myself sharing more than I normally would with someone I'd never met, but the relationship felt real and valuable in a way that my offline friendships often didn't. Alex started sharing links to more exclusive content and gradually began suggesting that I might be interested in contributing rather than just consuming. Nothing dramatic at first, just sharing my thoughts on certain topics, maybe helping to moderate discussions, creating content that other users might find interesting. The suggestions became more specific over time, with Alex mentioning opportunities to participate in projects that sounded vaguely described but intellectually challenging. Around this time, I started noticing changes in my offline life as well. People in town began paying attention to me in ways they hadn't before. One afternoon, a woman I'd never seen before approached me outside the post office and said my name, not asking if I was Sarah, just saying it like she already knew. When I asked how she knew me, she just smiled and walked away. A few days later, the assistant at the bookshop mentioned that someone had told her I was interested in philosophy books, specifically mentioning a topic I'd only ever discussed in private messages with Alex. These weren't coincidences anymore. Information about me was being shared among people who had no obvious reason to know anything about my interests or activities. My browsing habits were changing as well. Sites I'd never visited before would appear in my search suggestions. Videos related to topics I'd only discussed in private messages would show up in my recommendations, and advertisements would reference ideas I'd only encountered in those obscure forums. It felt like my online activity was being monitored and influenced in ways that should have been impossible. Alex's messages became more urgent. They talked about time-sensitive opportunities, limited spaces in projects, the need to make decisions quickly before options disappeared. There was a sense that I was being offered something valuable that wouldn't be available indefinitely, but also that hesitation might mean missing out on experiences that could change my perspective permanently. The pressure coincided with increasing isolation from my normal social connections. My school friends seemed less interesting than they had before. My conversations with my dad became more perfunctory, and I found myself spending more time alone with my computer than engaging with the physical world around me. The online relationships felt more real and valuable than anything happening offline. One evening in late May, Alex sent me specific instructions for a meeting. Not dramatic or obviously threatening, just a suggestion that we should meet in person to discuss opportunities that couldn't be adequately explained through messages. The location was a car park near the beach, isolated enough for privacy, but public enough to feel safe. I almost didn't go. Something about the whole situation had started to feel wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The progression from casual conversation to private messages to increasingly intense content to personal meetings seemed too smooth, too planned, too much like something that had been designed rather than something that had developed naturally. But I was curious, and Alex had invested weeks in building a relationship that felt meaningful and intellectually valuable. The suggestion to meet felt like a natural next step, rather than a dramatic escalation. I convinced myself that my concerns were just nervousness about meeting someone in person after only knowing them online. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday evening when the tourist crowds would have gone home and the locals would be settled in for the night. I told my dad I was going for a walk along the beach, which wasn't unusual for me, and set off towards the designated car park around sunset. I waited for about 20 minutes, watching the sun set over the water and wondering if I'd been stood up. Just as I was starting to think about heading home, a car pulled into the car park and parked near where I was standing. The driver got out and walked towards me with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly who they were looking for. It wasn't Alex, at least not the Alex I'd been imagining during our weeks of conversation. The person approaching me was older than I'd expected, better dressed, and had the kind of professional demeanor that suggested they weren't just another forum user looking for interesting conversations. But what unsettled me most was the way they looked at me, not like they were meeting someone for the first time, but like they were checking me against the description they already had. They introduced themselves using Alex's username and referenced specific details from our private messages, so there was no question they were the person I'd been talking to. But as they spoke, I noticed they seemed to know things about me that I'd never mentioned online. The route I usually took to school, the cafe where I sometimes did homework, even the fact that my dad worked late on Thursdays. Small details that could have been gathered by someone who'd been watching me for longer than I'd been talking to Alex. The conversation was friendly, but felt different from our online exchanges. They seemed more focused on practical details than philosophical discussions, asking specific questions about my daily routines, my family situation, my plans for the summer holidays. The questions felt like an interview rather than a casual conversation between friends. They explained that the projects they'd mentioned in their messages were more substantial than they'd been able to describe online. Real-world activities that would involve travel, possibly extended periods away from home, experiences that would be personally challenging but ultimately educational. The descriptions were still vague, but the implication was that this was an opportunity for someone serious about expanding their understanding of the world. As they talked, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable, not because of anything they said specifically, but because the whole situation felt rehearsed, as if they'd had this conversation many times before with other people. Their responses to my questions seemed prepared rather than spontaneous, and they showed more interest in my logistics than my genuine concerns about what I'd be getting involved in. I made excuses about needing to get home before my dad started worrying, and they didn't push for an immediate answer. They gave me a phone number to call if I decided I was interested, and mentioned that similar opportunities might not be available again for some time. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. Walking home, I felt like I'd dodged something without quite understanding what it was. The person I'd met seemed professional and articulate, not obviously dangerous or threatening, but something about the entire interaction felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The gap between our online conversations and the in-person meeting was too large to ignore. Over the next few days, I found myself paying more attention to my surroundings. The same car seemed to be parked on my street more often than seemed coincidental. People I didn't recognize appeared to be taking photos with their phones when I walked past. Shop assistants asked questions about my plans and activities that felt like casual conversation, but might have been something more systematic. I stopped visiting the forums and didn't respond to Alex's follow-up messages, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it became more pronounced as the weeks passed. I started taking different routes to school, varying my daily routines, and paying attention to patterns in ways I'd never felt the need to before. The strange thing is, I can't prove any of it actually happened the way I remember it. The forum sites I used to visit have disappeared or moved to addresses I can't find. The messages from Alex seem to have been deleted from my accounts. The phone number they gave me just rings without anyone answering. I think about other teenagers who might be having similar conversations with people they've never met, following links to sites that gradually become more extreme, building relationships that feel meaningful but might be something else entirely. I wonder how many people are offered opportunities that sound educational but might actually be something very different. Because if I'm right about what was happening to me, then it's still happening to other people. The forums are still there, just at different addresses. The users are still building relationships with curious teenagers who think they're accessing forbidden knowledge rather than being carefully guided towards experiences they don't fully understand. Imagine discovering that someone has been watching you through your bedroom window for months, filming your most private moments, and selling the footage online to strangers. Now imagine that this isn't happening to just you, but to thousands of people across the country, probably the world, all completely unaware that their lives have become entertainment for perverts with deep pockets. The worst part? It's not some far-fetched nightmare scenario. It's happening right now. I stumbled across it by accident, if you can call 3 months of deliberate searching an accident. I was writing my dissertation on digital privacy and anonymity networks for my media studies degree at Manchester. Proper academic research, you understand. I wasn't some basement dweller looking for thrills. I had ethics approval forms and everything. The Tor browser had been running on my laptop for weeks. I'd bookmarked the usual suspects, a few cannabis marketplaces, some forums discussing encryption, the odd political dissent site. Standard fare for someone studying how people communicate when they don't want to be watched. My supervisor, Dr. Chen, had given me a reading list of academic papers about online anonymity, but I wanted primary sources, real examples. That's how I found the link. It was buried in a forum post about internet freedom, sandwiched between complaints about government surveillance and discussions of VPN protocols. Just a string of random characters ending in .onion with a single word underneath. Rooms. The site took ages to load. That's normal on Tor. Everything crawls along at the speed of dial-up. When it finally appeared, it looked like something from the early days of the internet. Black background, green text, no images. Just a list of what looked like chat room names, each with a number next to it. The numbers were small, usually single digits. I clicked on one called Yorkshire Evening. The page that loaded had a simple interface, a text box at the bottom, a larger window above showing messages. But there were no messages, just a counter at the top showing 3 viewers and a button that said Request Access. I sat there for about 10 minutes, watching the viewer count fluctuate between 2 and 5. Nothing else happened. No messages appeared, no instructions. Just that green text on black and the gentle hum of my laptop fan. It felt like standing outside a shop with blacked out windows, knowing people were inside but unable to see what they were doing. I tried a few other rooms. Same setup, view accounts, empty chat windows, that request access button. The names were mundane enough. Brighton Pier, Camden Market, Sunday Roast. They could have been tourism websites or local community groups, but something about the whole thing felt wrong. The way the viewer numbers changed constantly, as if people were flicking between rooms, watching, waiting. After about an hour, I closed the browser and went back to my dissertation. I had enough material about dark web marketplaces and didn't need to go down whatever rabbit hole that site represented. Dr. Chen would be pleased with my chapter on cryptocurrency adoption in illegal markets. That was proper academic work. But I kept thinking about those rooms, the way they just sat there, empty but watched. Over the next few days, I found myself opening the site again, checking the viewer counts, watching the numbers change. It became a habit, like checking social media or the weather. A few minutes here and there between writing chapters and attending seminars. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late in the university library, and when I got back to my flat in Fallowfield, I opened the site almost without thinking. The viewer count on Yorkshire Evening was higher than usual, nearly 20 people, and for the first time, there were messages in the chat window. They weren't conversation exactly, more like coordinates, times and dates, grid references. Someone had posted 53.4 degrees north, 2.2 degrees west, Thursday, 23:30. And others were responding with single words. Confirmed. Watching. Ready. I recognized those coordinates. They were for somewhere in Manchester city centre, near the cathedral, about 15 minutes from where I was sitting. The rational part of my brain knew I should close the browser and forget about it. These were clearly people planning something, and coordinates with specific times suggested it wasn't just chat. But the researcher in me was curious. What were they planning? Was this some kind of urban exploration group? A photography meetup? The coordinates were for a public area. What could they possibly be doing there that required such secrecy? Thursday came and went. I didn't go to the coordinates, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. I found myself checking the news for incidents in Manchester city centre, scanning local police Twitter accounts for anything unusual. Nothing appeared. Whatever had happened, if anything, hadn't made the news. The following week, new coordinates appeared. This time for Liverpool, then Birmingham. Always a major city. Always with that same pattern of confirmations and single-word responses. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the coordinates and times. Not because I planned to do anything with them, but because documenting patterns is what researchers do. The pattern was monthly, third Thursday of each month, around 11:30 at night. Always city centres, always near major landmarks or transport hubs. The coordinates were precise, not just somewhere in Birmingham, but specific to within a few meters. After 3 months of watching, I decided to visit one of the locations. Not during the appointed time, obviously. I wasn't stupid. But I wanted to see what was there, what might draw these people to those specific spots. The coordinates for that month were for a location near Liverpool Street Station in London. Easy enough to visit during the day under the pretense of legitimate research. The location was a small side street off the main road, narrow, with old Victorian buildings that had been converted into flats above shops. During the day, it was busy enough. People cutting through to avoid the crowds on the main street. Workers from nearby offices grabbing lunch. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain why someone would choose to meet there at 11:30 on a Thursday night. But as I walked down the street, I noticed something odd. Several of the buildings had small security cameras mounted on the walls. Not the usual CCTV you see everywhere in London, but smaller, more discreet ones. They were angled to cover the street from different positions, creating overlapping fields of view. It struck me that you'd have very comprehensive coverage of anyone walking down that street. I went back to Manchester and thought about what I'd seen. Coordinates, confirmations, a location with extensive camera coverage. It was starting to form a picture I didn't like. The next month, I made a decision that I still regret. I went to the Manchester location at the appointed time. It was raining that Thursday night, the kind of fine drizzle that soaks through your jacket without you noticing. I'd positioned myself about 50 meters from the coordinates in the doorway of a closed shop, where I could see the street but remain hidden. I told myself I was just observing, that I'd leave at the first sign of anything dodgy. At 11:20, a figure appeared at the far end of the street. They walked slowly, deliberately, checking something on their phone. At 25 past, another person arrived from the opposite direction. They didn't acknowledge each other, but both stopped near the exact coordinates I'd written down. By 11:30, there were 5 people standing in roughly the same area. None of them spoke. They just stood there, occasionally glancing around or checking their phones. I was beginning to think this was the most boring conspiracy I'd ever witnessed when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Each of them was holding a small device, something about the size of a smartphone, but with what looked like a small lens on one end. And they were all pointing these devices in the same direction, toward the residential buildings that lined the street. I followed their gaze and saw what they were looking at. In one of the upper floor windows, there was a light on. Just a normal household light. But in the window, I could see the silhouette of someone moving around. Someone who had no idea they were being watched. The group stood there for exactly 30 minutes. Then, without any signal I could detect, they all began to walk away in different directions. The whole thing had taken place in complete silence. I waited until they were all gone before I walked home. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. I just witnessed something that felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. A group of people with cameras watching someone's flat. It could have been innocent, amateur photographers, urban explorers, even researchers like myself. But the secrecy, the coordinates, the synchronized timing, none of that suggested innocent activity. The next day, I went back to the dark website. The viewer count for Yorkshire Evening was back to normal levels, but there was new activity in the chat. People were posting what looked like file names. MCR2311, window4.mp4, MCR2311, kitchen2.ave. The files were followed by strings of numbers and letters, Bitcoin wallet addresses. I realized I was looking at a marketplace. The coordinates weren't meeting points for urban exploration or photography. They were organized surveillance sessions. People were gathering to film strangers in their homes and then selling the footage online. That was disturbing enough. But as I dug deeper into the site, I found something worse. Some of the room names weren't locations at all. They were what looked like names or descriptions. Red hair student, night shift nurse, single mum bedtime. These weren't random voyeurism sessions. They were targeted. Someone was identifying specific individuals and organizing groups to film them. The Bitcoin addresses suggested people were paying for custom content. I felt sick. This wasn't academic research anymore. I'd stumbled into something that was actively harming real people. People who had no idea they were being watched, filmed, and potentially stalked. The rational thing would have been to contact the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found a website on the dark web where people might be doing something illegal? That I'd witnessed a group of people standing on a street corner with cameras? I had no proof of wrongdoing, no evidence that actual crimes were being committed. Instead, I tried to dig deeper. I wanted to understand the scale of what I'd found, to gather enough evidence to make a proper report. I started monitoring the site more systematically, documenting the patterns, screenshotting the conversations. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The site wasn't just organizing surveillance, it was a complete ecosystem. People would post requests, descriptions of individuals they wanted filmed. Others would volunteer to do the filming. The footage would be edited and sold. There were even reviews and ratings for the people doing the filming. But the most disturbing part was how organized it all was. This wasn't a few perverts with cameras. There were hundreds of people involved, maybe thousands. The Bitcoin transactions suggested serious money was changing hands. Someone was running this as a business, and the targets weren't random. They were often vulnerable people, students living alone, single parents, people working night shifts. The kind of people who might not notice if someone was watching their flat, or who might not be believed if they reported feeling like they were being stalked. I started having trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those silhouettes in windows, people going about their evening routines, while strangers with cameras watched from the street below. I began checking my own windows obsessively, making sure the curtains were closed, looking for unusual activity outside. The paranoia was probably irrational. I lived in a shared house with 3 other students. We were on the ground floor with a small front garden that would make surveillance difficult. But knowing what I knew about how these people operated, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might be next. That's when I noticed the van. It was parked on my street when I got home from university on a Friday afternoon. Nothing unusual about that. Parking was always tight in our area. But it was still there when I left for the pub that evening, and when I came back around midnight. The next morning, it had moved to a different spot, but it was still on the same street. I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it if not for what I'd learned about the surveillance network. But once you know how these things work, you start seeing patterns everywhere. The van was always positioned where it had a clear view of our house. The windows were tinted, so you couldn't see inside, and it moved regularly, just enough to avoid drawing attention. I started taking photos of it, documenting when it appeared and where it parked. I even walked past it a few times, trying to see if anyone was inside. But the windows were too dark, and I didn't want to be too obvious about looking. After a week of this, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The van probably belonged to someone who worked in the area or was visiting a friend. I was letting what I'd discovered online affect my perception of reality. That's what happens when you spend too much time staring into the dark corners of the internet. But then I found my address in the site's chat logs. It was buried in a conversation about Manchester targets, listed alongside 2 other addresses in my area. Someone had posted it with a description that matched my appearance and mentioned my university. They knew where I lived, what I looked like, and where I studied. The worst part was the response. Other users were bidding for the surveillance job, offering to provide footage within the week. The highest bid was nearly £200. I'd gone from researcher to target without realizing it. Someone had identified me, probably through my digital footprint, and put me up for sale on their surveillance marketplace. The van outside my house wasn't paranoia, it was reconnaissance. I packed a bag, and left Manchester that night. Told my housemates I had a family emergency and would be gone for a few weeks. I drove to my parents' house in Chester and stayed there for a month, claiming I needed to focus on my dissertation without distractions. During that time, I tried to report what I'd found to the police. I called the non-emergency number and explained about the dark website and the surveillance network. The officer I spoke to was polite, but clearly didn't understand the technical aspects of what I was describing. He took down my details and said someone would get back to me, but no one ever did. I tried contacting some of the cybercrime units, but without concrete evidence of specific crimes, they weren't interested. What I'd found was disturbing, but it existed in a legal grey area. Standing on public streets with cameras isn't illegal. Selling footage of people in their homes might be, but proving that was happening would require an investigation that no one seemed willing to undertake. Eventually, I had to go back to Manchester to finish my degree. I changed my address, moving to a different part of the city. I bought thick curtains for all my windows and developed a habit of checking the street before leaving my flat. The van never reappeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I finished my dissertation on a completely different topic. Dr. Chen was disappointed that I'd moved away from my original research into dark web marketplaces, but I told him I'd found the subject too depressing to continue with. He probably thought I was being oversensitive. The surveillance site is still online. I check it occasionally, using different computers and IP addresses, just to see if it's still active. It is. The room names change, the coordinates shift to different cities, but the pattern continues. People gathering to film strangers, selling the footage to whoever wants to buy it. Sometimes I think about the person I saw in that window in Manchester. The silhouette moving around their flat, completely unaware that 5 people were standing in the street below, recording their every movement. I wonder if they ever found out. I wonder if they ever felt that creeping sensation that someone was watching them, or if they just went about their life, never knowing that their privacy had been violated and sold to strangers online. The thing that disturbs me most isn't the surveillance itself, although that's bad enough. It's how organized it all is, how many people are involved, how much money is changing hands. What I found wasn't some small group of perverts with cameras. It was an industry. And if they could identify me from my digital footprint, if they could find my address and put me up for sale on their marketplace, then they can do the same to anyone. Your address might already be on one of those sites. Someone might already be bidding for footage of you going about your daily routine. You'll probably never know. That's the worst part. You'll never know if that van parked outside your house is just a van, or if someone inside is watching you through tinted windows. You'll never know if that person lingering on the street corner is just waiting for a bus, or if they're pointing a camera at your bedroom window. You'll never know, but now you'll always wonder. And that's exactly what they want. I thought it was some twisted prank at first, until I saw the bruises on his face and the way he looked directly at the camera. Not past it, at me. I didn't even want to click the link, but he pushed for it. He said, "What's the worst that could happen?" I should have pushed back harder, said no, or just left. But I didn't. And now I see his face every time I close my eyes. I'd never really clicked with anyone like him before. Callum had this dry, brutal sense of humor, the kind where you're not sure if he's joking or just being a dick until he smirks. We met through this niche Discord server for analog horror fans, ended up on the same voice chat one night, stayed up till 3 a.m, talking about everything from cursed YouTube videos to those weird VHS argies no one finishes. It turned out we lived one town apart, about 20 minutes by train. After that, it wasn't just online anymore. We'd hang out, get takeaway, crash at each other's places. He always had something playing on his second monitor, usually unsettling internet rabbit holes or weird live streams from countries neither of us could pronounce. I quite liked the chaos, to be honest. He made everything feel more intense, more alive. But that edge, I didn't realize how real it would get. The last time I saw him was a Thursday. We were meant to meet up Saturday. He was supposed to help me move some furniture, but he ghosted. At first, I assumed hangover, or maybe he'd just forgotten. But then Sunday passed, then Monday. I went by his flat after work. Lights were off, curtains drawn, door locked. But outside there were 4 Uber Eats bags, one of them half split open. Ice cream melted through the bottom. I reported him missing Tuesday morning. The woman at the desk in the police station barely looked up, scribbled his name down, nodded like it was routine, like he was routine, said they'd log it and send someone round if anything came up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about one of those bags of food, how the receipt had the wrong name. J something, not Callum, not even close. I went back to his flat the next day and just sat there across the street, watching. Then, late that evening, I got a message from his account. Just a single link. No words, no emojis, no subject. The URL was long and messy, no preview. But I recognized one thing, the string.onion buried inside it. I told myself maybe it was him messing with me, a prank, something he'd find hilarious later. I copied it, but I didn't open it, not yet. I finally caved that Friday. I booted up Tor, pasted the link in, and just sat there watching it buffer. The site was crude. It had a black background, one embedded player, no controls, just a timer in the corner and a blank title bar. Then it loaded. It was him, Callum, sitting in a dark room, shirtless, pale, face swollen, lips split, and then he looked straight at the camera, not like he was looking at a lens, like he was looking through it, at me. I wasn't sure if it was a recording or not, so I screen recorded what I could. My hands were shaking so bad the mouse kept jittering. Soon after, I went back to the police. I thought it would be different this time. It wasn't. They asked why I had the footage, why I hadn't come in sooner. They even asked what my relationship with him was. And when I said we were friends, they paused. One of them asked, real quiet, "Just friends?" I walked out, deleted the screen capture from my phone on the way home. I was scared they'd take it, or worse, say I did something to him. I started staying at my parents'. They live outside town. No one knew I was there. I didn't post anything about it. I didn't tell anyone, and my phone stayed off most nights. But then, on Saturday morning, someone rang the bell. My mum called me to the door. "Did you order something?" I went downstairs to find her holding a parcel. No label, no address, just my name. Inside the parcel was a USB stick, nothing else. I didn't plug it into anything right away. I waited until later that day, until everyone had gone to bed. When it felt safe, I plugged it into my old laptop. It felt smarter. It has no Wi-Fi. After it had eventually loaded, the only file on it was a video. There was no title, just a date. The same day I got the message. I hesitated, but then I pressed play. It opened. It was me, sitting at my desk, staring at my monitor, typing. I didn't even remember that moment, but it was definitely me. I had the same clothes I usually wore at home, and the angle, someone had been in the flat across from mine, filming me, watching me. Then the camera cut, and I saw him again. Callum. He was on his knees, shaking. Behind him, there was a plastic sheet, a roll of duct tape, and something metallic, glinting. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but there was no sound. Then I saw it. A hand, just the edge of one, came into frame. And everything after that I should have looked away. I should have closed it, but I didn't. I couldn't. The moment he stopped breathing, the stream cut out. Back to black. They never found him. The police closed the case 2 weeks later. They declared it an unsubstantiated report, whatever that means. I wiped my all drives, burned the USB and switched phones. I'm not sure how much good it'll do. You don't have to listen to me. I realize I'm just a stranger to you, but if you ever get sent a Red Room link, even as a joke, don't click it. Just don't. Have you ever been in the situation where you do something seemingly normal, something routine, and it completely changes your life? I'm curious. What would you do if you took your laptop in for a simple repair and end up discovering that the ordinary-looking guy in the computer shop is involved in things that would make your worst nightmares seem tame? That the person fixing your webcam issue has been using that same webcam to watch you for months? I work as a teaching assistant at a primary school in Coventry. There's nothing particularly exciting about my life. I help 7-year-olds with their reading, supervise playtime, and assist the main teachers with various administrative tasks. The pay isn't brilliant, but I enjoy working with children and the holidays are decent. Last autumn, my laptop started acting up. The webcam would activate randomly, the little green light flickering on for a few seconds before switching off again. Sometimes I'd catch it happening while I was using the computer. Other times I'd notice it had been on when I returned from making tea or using the bathroom. Initially, I assumed it was a software glitch. Ran virus scans, updated drivers, tried all the usual troubleshooting steps you find online. Nothing worked. If anything, the problem seemed to be getting worse. The camera would activate more frequently, sometimes staying on for several minutes at a time. Eventually, I decided to take it to a local repair shop. The place was called Digital Solutions and occupied a narrow storefront between a charity shop and a kebab restaurant. I'd walked past it hundreds of times but never really noticed it before. The kind of business that blends into the background of everyday urban life. The owner was a middle-aged man named Trevor, who seemed knowledgeable about computers and quoted reasonable prices for the repair work. He explained that webcam issues were common, usually caused by corrupted drivers or malware infections. Said he'd need to keep the laptop for a few days to run comprehensive diagnostics and clean up the system. I dropped it off on a Wednesday morning and was told it would be ready by the weekend. Trevor provided a receipt and assured me that all customer data would remain private and secure during the repair process. That evening, I realized how much I relied on my laptop for basic activities, checking emails, browsing social media, watching streaming services before bed. Without it, I found myself with unexpectedly free time and nothing particular to do with it. On Thursday evening, I decided to walk past the shop to see if it was still open. The storefront was dark, but I could see light coming from what appeared to be a back office or workshop area. Trevor was working late, presumably fixing computers like mine. As I walked past, something caught my attention. Through the window, I could see multiple computer screens displaying what looked like video feeds. Not the typical desktop view you'd expect from computer repair work, but actual video streams showing various rooms and locations. I slowed down to get a better look, trying to appear casual while examining what was visible through the window. The video feeds showed different domestic spaces: bedrooms, living rooms, home offices. Most appeared to be empty, though a few showed people going about their normal evening routines. My first thought was that Trevor might be running some sort of security monitoring service alongside his computer repair business. Many small business owners take on multiple revenue streams to make ends meet. Nothing particularly suspicious about that. But something felt off about what I was seeing. The camera angles were wrong for professional security installations. Too intimate, too focused on private spaces rather than entry points or valuable items. These looked more like hidden cameras than security systems. I continued walking, but the image of those video feeds stayed with me. That night, I found myself wondering about my own laptop, about the webcam issues I'd been experiencing, about how long Trevor had been aware of the problem before I brought the computer to his shop. On Friday, I called to check on the repair progress. Trevor said the work was taking longer than expected, that he'd discovered more extensive malware infections than initially apparent. He'd need the weekend to complete the cleaning process, but the laptop would definitely be ready by Monday. This gave me an excuse to walk past the shop again Friday evening. Same pattern as the night before: dark storefront, lights in the back office, multiple screens displaying video feeds of domestic spaces. This time, I counted at least 6 different feeds visible through the window. One of them showed a young woman in what appeared to be her bedroom, getting ready for bed. The camera angle suggested it was positioned somewhere high up, possibly hidden in the ceiling fixture or ventilation grate. She had no idea she was being watched. Another feed showed a family watching television in their living room. 2 adults, 3 children, completely unaware that their private evening was being broadcast to Trevor's monitoring setup. The camera quality was good enough to make out facial features and read text on the television screen. I realized I was looking at a surveillance operation, not a security service. These were people being watched without their knowledge or consent, probably through compromised webcams in devices they'd brought to Trevor for repair. Devices like my laptop. When I collected my computer on Monday, Trevor was friendly and professional. Explained that he'd removed several malware infections and updated all the security software. Said the webcam issues should be completely resolved and provided documentation of all the work he'd performed. I paid the repair fee and took the laptop home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire situation. That evening, I covered the webcam with electrical tape and began researching how to detect covert surveillance software. The diagnostic tools I downloaded found several programs I didn't recognize, applications that weren't listed in the standard software inventory, but were definitely present on the system. Most appeared to be related to remote access and file sharing, the kind of software that could allow someone to control a computer from a distance. I spent the next several days learning about digital forensics, about how to trace network connections and monitor system activity. What I discovered was disturbing. My laptop was regularly connecting to IP addresses I didn't recognize, uploading small amounts of data at consistent intervals. The connection logs showed that these uploads had been happening for months, long before I'd taken the computer to Trevor for repair. But the frequency and volume of data transfer had increased significantly since getting the laptop back from his shop. I started documenting everything, screenshots of the network activity, records of the suspicious software installations, photos of Trevor's shop taken from the street. Built a comprehensive file of evidence, though I wasn't sure what I planned to do with it. That's when I decided to investigate Trevor's operation more thoroughly. Started walking past his shop at different times, observing patterns in his work schedule and customer traffic. Noticed that he seemed to specialize in devices with cameras, laptops, tablets, smartphones with front-facing cameras. Most of his customers appeared to be ordinary people dealing with routine technical problems. Students with slow computers, parents with virus-infected family laptops, elderly people who'd accidentally installed malicious software, all of them trusting Trevor to fix their problems and protect their privacy. One evening, I saw something that changed my understanding of what Trevor was actually running. Through the back office window, I could see him interacting with what appeared to be a live streaming interface. Multiple video feeds were active, but now there was chat functionality alongside the video streams. People were watching the feeds and commenting in real time, not just watching, but requesting specific actions or camera angles. Trevor was responding to these requests, apparently controlling which feeds were visible and how the surveillance was conducted. This wasn't just unauthorized monitoring. This was a commercial operation, selling access to private surveillance footage to paying customers around the world. I recognized one of the video feeds immediately. It showed a bedroom that looked exactly like mine, filmed from the angle where my laptop usually sat on the dresser. The electrical tape I'd placed over the webcam was visible in the corner of the frame, but the camera was somehow still transmitting video from inside my flat. Trevor had installed multiple surveillance devices during the repair process. The webcam issue I'd originally brought to him was probably his doing in the first place, a way to identify potential surveillance targets and get access to their devices. I left the area immediately and went home to search my flat thoroughly. Found a tiny camera hidden in the smoke detector above my bed, another one built into what looked like a standard electrical outlet near my desk. Professional installations, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The devices were connected to my home Wi-Fi network, probably configured during Trevor's access to my laptop and password information. They'd been broadcasting footage of my private life to his streaming platform for weeks, maybe months. I documented everything with my phone camera, then carefully removed the surveillance devices without damaging them, kept them as evidence, along with all the digital forensics information I'd gathered about the compromised laptop. But when I tried to report the situation to police, I encountered a problem I hadn't anticipated. The officers I spoke with seemed knowledgeable about traditional crimes, but struggled to understand the technical aspects of what I was describing. Digital surveillance, dark web streaming platforms, cryptocurrency payment systems. It was outside their normal area of expertise. They took my statement and collected the physical evidence, but explained that investigating this type of cybercrime would require specialist resources that might not be available immediately. Said they'd be in touch once they'd consulted with their digital forensics team. That was 4 months ago. I've heard nothing back from police, and Trevor's shop is still operating normally. Same storefront, same repair services, same trusting customers bringing their camera-equipped devices to be fixed. I moved to a different flat across town, replaced all my electronic devices, took comprehensive security precautions to prevent future surveillance. But moving doesn't change what you know, and the knowledge of what Trevor is doing follows me through every ordinary day. The worst part isn't knowing that I was watched without consent. The worst part is understanding how many other people are probably being watched right now. People who trust their local computer repair shop, to fix their problems and protect their privacy. Trevor's operation depends on that trust, on people like me who need technical help and assume that small business owners are fundamentally honest, on the invisibility that comes with running a boring, everyday service that nobody pays much attention to. I've started noticing other computer repair shops around the city, wondering how many of them might be running similar operations. How many ordinary-looking technicians are actually surveillance entrepreneurs, selling access to private footage through dark web streaming platforms. Sometimes I wonder if reporting Trevor to police was the right decision, or if I should have tried to expose his operation through other means: media attention, social media campaigns, direct warnings to his potential victims. But all of these approaches would require evidence that I'm not sure I could provide without admitting to my own illegal surveillance of his activities. That's the genius of operations like Trevor's. They create witnesses who are bound by their own complicity, people who can't report what they've seen without acknowledging their own borderline criminal behavior. I've never told anyone else about this experience. Not colleagues, not friends, not family members. What would I say? That my computer repair guy was running a surveillance operation and I discovered it by spying on his business. That I removed hidden cameras from my own flat but can't prove where they came from. But I'm telling you now, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because the weight of keeping it secret has become too much. Maybe because sharing it might somehow make it less real, less immediate, less present in my daily thoughts. Or maybe because I've started to suspect that creating witnesses was always part of Trevor's business model. That people like me who discover what he's doing are meant to discover it, meant to carry the knowledge forward through stories that can never be properly verified. Maybe the real product isn't just the surveillance footage, but the awareness that such surveillance is possible, the understanding that any electronic device could be compromised, that any repair technician could be more than they appear to be. Trevor is still operating his shop, still fixing computers and installing surveillance equipment, still running his streaming platform for customers around the world. And somewhere in Coventry, other people are probably walking past his storefront right now, thinking about getting their webcam issues fixed by a friendly, knowledgeable local businessman. Maybe by telling you this, I'm doing exactly what Trevor's operation requires to survive and spread. Creating awareness, planting seeds of paranoia, making people more conscious of the surveillance possibilities that exist in their ordinary digital lives. Maybe that's how these things work. Not just through the technical infrastructure of hidden cameras and streaming platforms, but through the social infrastructure of witnesses who carry the knowledge forward, who ensure that the awareness of such possibilities becomes part of the general consciousness. I still work at the primary school, still help children with their reading, still live a fundamentally ordinary life. But now I understand that ordinary life exists alongside operations like Trevor's, that the surface of everyday business conceals activities that most people never imagine are happening. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new flat with my new laptop, I find myself wondering if Trevor was really working alone, or if he was part of something larger. A network of repair shops and surveillance operations, all feeding content to the same streaming platforms, all serving the same global audience of people who pay to watch strangers in their most private moments. That might be the most disturbing possibility of all. Not that one creepy computer repair guy was running a surveillance operation, but that such operations are common enough to sustain entire industries, entire ecosystems of people who make their living by violating the privacy of ordinary people who just needed their laptops fixed. My brother Danny used to collect coincidences, not deliberately. He just had this habit of pointing out when things lined up in ways that seemed too convenient to be random. Like when his favorite band announced a concert on his birthday, or when the book he needed for a school project turned up in a charity shop the same day he got the assignment. He'd get this look on his face, half suspicious and half delighted, as if he'd caught the universe playing a trick on him. I've never been the type to believe in coincidences, but I am now. I've learned that sometimes what looks like pure chance is actually something much more deliberate, much more planned than you could ever imagine. And sometimes curiosity about the wrong thing can make you part of someone else's design without you ever realizing it. This is about my younger brother Danny. He was 15 when it happened, the kind of lad who spent most of his time online but wasn't particularly tech savvy. Just a normal teenager who played games, watched videos, and got into arguments on forums about things that didn't really matter. He lived with our mum in Nottingham after our parents split, and I'd see him every other weekend when he'd come to stay with me in Sheffield. He was always curious about things he wasn't supposed to know about. Not in a rebellious way. He just wanted to understand how the world actually worked. The trouble started when he read something online about hidden parts of the internet where you could find things that weren't available on normal websites, not just pirated content, but genuinely disturbing material that existed in spaces most people never knew about. During the summer holidays, he started researching these hidden networks, following links from one forum to another, slowly building an understanding of how to access parts of the internet that required special software. His first attempts were unsuccessful, mostly leading to dead links, but he persisted with that teenage conviction that there were secrets being kept from him. When he finally managed to access these hidden networks, most of what he found was disappointing. Defunct marketplaces, conspiracy forums, websites selling things he had no interest in. But he kept exploring, going deeper into increasingly obscure corners. The content became progressively stranger and more disturbing, moving from simple illegality into areas that made him genuinely uncomfortable. Yet something compelled him to continue. The breakthrough came when he found a forum dedicated to discussing live content. Users shared links and recommendations with the casual tone of people discussing television programs, rating what they'd seen, and making requests for specific types of content. Reading through these discussions, he began to understand that what he'd initially dismissed as internet mythology might actually exist. The sites themselves were primitive but functional. Basic interfaces, poor video quality, minimal features. But they worked well enough to stream content that was clearly authentic rather than professionally produced fiction. What he found most unsettling was how organized it all seemed despite the amateur presentation. There were schedules, regular programming, someone coordinating activities across multiple streams. The forums contained discussions about how participants were recruited and managed. The process seemed to start with identifying vulnerable individuals through social media and gaming platforms, gradually building trust before making direct contact. Reading these discussions made him increasingly uncomfortable, but also more fascinated. Part of him knew he should stop, that he was seeing things no 15-year-old should see, but another part couldn't look away. What really caught his attention were the references to operations in the UK. Users shared information about potential targets and opportunities across different regions, including areas he recognized. The discussions about recruitment were particularly detailed. Users traded advice on social media monitoring, techniques for initiating contact, methods for gradually escalating involvement. He started noticing patterns in his own online activities that matched what he'd read about target identification. Gaming platforms, where he'd made friends with people he'd never met. Social media interactions with accounts that seemed designed to gather personal information, and messages from users who showed unusual interest in his daily routine and family situation. The realization that he might have accidentally identified himself as a potential target was genuinely frightening. His exploration of these networks would have left digital traces. His interest in the content would have been noted, and his online behavior would have been analyzed for vulnerabilities. By investigating their world, he'd made himself visible to people who specialized in exploitation. The direct contact began through private messages on one of the forums. Someone had been observing his posts and wanted to share more exclusive content that wasn't available in the public areas. The approach was gradual and friendly, presenting the interaction as a privilege rather than something that should raise suspicion. For a moment, he hesitated. Something about the message felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. But curiosity won out over caution, as it always seemed to with him. The private content was significantly more disturbing than what he'd seen in the open forums. Higher production values, more organized presentation, material that suggested the operators had serious resources and locations. Over several weeks, the private conversations became more personal. His contact showed interest in his life, his location, his family situation, and his daily routines. The questions were subtle and spread across multiple conversations, but collectively they built a detailed picture of his circumstances and vulnerabilities. The turning point came when his contact offered to arrange a meeting. Not dramatic or obviously threatening, just a suggestion that he might be interested in seeing how these operations actually worked, perhaps even contributing in some way. The proposal was presented as an opportunity rather than a demand, something that should feel exciting rather than dangerous. By this point, his judgment seemed completely compromised. The weeks of exposure to increasingly extreme content had normalized things that should have been immediately recognized as dangerous. His contact had skillfully managed the progression from curious observer to potential participant, using techniques that had clearly been refined through experience. The meeting was arranged for a weekend when he was supposed to be staying with me in Sheffield. Instead of taking the usual train, he was to meet his contact at a service station just outside Nottingham. The location was public enough to feel safe but isolated enough for privacy. Exactly the sort of place that would appear in the recruitment discussions he'd read. I didn't know any of this was happening. As far as I was concerned, he was coming to stay as usual, maybe arriving a bit later than normal, but nothing that seemed worth questioning. Our mum dropped him at the train station that Saturday morning, and we expected him to arrive in Sheffield by early afternoon. When he didn't turn up, we initially assumed he'd missed his connection or decided to meet friends instead. Teenagers don't always follow plans exactly, and he wasn't particularly reliable about keeping people informed of his movements. It wasn't until evening that we started to worry seriously. The police were helpful, but not particularly concerned at first. A 15-year-old missing for less than 24 hours wasn't unusual, especially during school holidays when kids often made spontaneous plans with friends. They took details and assured us they'd investigate, but their tone suggested this would resolve itself quickly. His phone was switched off, his social media accounts showed no recent activity, and none of his friends had heard from him since the previous evening. The complete silence was unusual for someone who normally maintained constant online contact with various people throughout the day. The investigation revealed that he'd never boarded the train to Sheffield. CCTV from the station showed him leaving the building shortly after our mum had dropped him off. walking towards the car park rather than the platforms. After that, the trail went cold completely. Police found his online activities eventually, but understanding what they meant required technical expertise that took time to arrange. By the time they'd pieced together his exploration of hidden networks and identified his contact, weeks had passed, and any physical evidence had long since disappeared. The forums he'd been using went offline shortly after his disappearance. Not just the specific sites he'd visited, but entire sections of the network seemed to shut down and relocate. Whether this was coincidental timing or a deliberate response to increased attention was impossible to determine. His contact's identity proved impossible to trace. The account had been carefully constructed to avoid revealing any genuine personal information, using technical methods that made investigation extremely difficult. The conversations they'd had contained no references to real locations or identifiable details. 6 months later, we're still waiting for answers that will probably never come. His disappearance has been classified as suspected abduction, but there's no evidence of who might be responsible or where he might have been taken. Sometimes I wonder if his curiosity was genuinely random, or if he was deliberately guided towards those networks by people who were already watching for suitable targets. The coincidence of him discovering exactly the right forums, connecting with exactly the right person, and being offered exactly the opportunity that would appeal to his personality seems almost too convenient to be accidental. I think about the techniques they described for identifying and approaching targets, the systematic way they built trust before making their move. Everything that happened to him followed patterns that were discussed openly in those forums, as if his entire experience was just another implementation of proven methods. His initial discovery might not have been accidental at all. His online activities could have been monitored and guided. His curiosity deliberately cultivated by people who specialized in recruiting vulnerable individuals. That's why I believe in coincidence now. Not because things happen randomly, but because recognizing patterns helps you see when they might be something more deliberate. Danny used to collect coincidences like they were treasures. Now I wonder if he became one himself. I thought I was doing something good. That's what makes this whole situation so much worse. 6 months ago, I was just someone trying to make the internet a safer place. Now, I'm hiding in a Premier Inn somewhere in the Midlands, knowing that tomorrow night, thousands of people will tune in to watch me become the star of my own nightmare. It started when I applied for a job as a content moderator with a company called SafeNet Solutions. They advertised themselves as specialists in keeping harmful content off social media platforms. The work seemed meaningful, protecting children from inappropriate material, removing violent content, flagging harassment. The kind of job where you could feel like you were making a difference. I'd been unemployed for nearly 8 months after my last position was made redundant. Living in a shared house in Birmingham with people half my age. Watching my savings dwindle while sending off countless applications. When SafeNet offered me the position working from home with decent pay, I jumped at it without asking too many questions. The training was straightforward. They gave me access to their proprietary software that would queue up flagged content for review. Videos, images, live streams, all reported by automated systems or other users as potentially violating community guidelines. My job was to watch each piece of content and make a decision. Remove it, leave it up, or escalate it to a senior moderator. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Spam, harassment, people posting copyrighted material, the occasional violent video or inappropriate image involving children, which would get immediately escalated and removed. work was emotionally draining. You see humanity at its worst when you're cleaning up after it. But it felt necessary. I worked remotely, reviewing content for 8 hours a day from my bedroom. The company provided the computer and software, along with strict guidelines about confidentiality. We weren't allowed to discuss our work with anyone outside the company, ostensibly to protect user privacy and prevent people from gaming the moderation system. About 2 months into the job, I started noticing patterns in some of the content that came through my queue. Videos that looked like they were filmed in similar locations, industrial settings with concrete walls and minimal furnishing. The content itself wasn't explicitly violating guidelines, but something about it felt off. Empty rooms with strange equipment, brief clips of preparations for something unclear. When I flagged these for escalation, asking for guidance on whether they violated guidelines, my supervisor would respond that they'd been reviewed and deemed acceptable. I was told to stop wasting time on borderline cases and focus on clear violations. The message was clear: approve these and move on. I tried to push back, suggesting that these videos might be connected to something harmful, but I was reminded that I was new and still in my probationary period. SafeNet had strict policies about overreach. Moderators who flagged too much borderline content would be let go for inefficiency. I needed the job, so I started approving the strange videos without comment. Then I began noticing something else. Some of the videos had embedded metadata that my software could read, but that wouldn't be visible to normal users. Location data, timestamps, user identifiers. I shouldn't have been able to see this information. It suggested my moderation software had deeper access to these platforms than a normal content reviewer would need. One evening, while reviewing a particularly odd video of an empty room with metal restraints visible in the background, I noticed that the metadata showed it was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers simultaneously. This wasn't a recorded video that someone had uploaded. It was happening live. And yet, it was coming through my queue as if it was standard user-generated content awaiting moderation. That's when I realized I wasn't moderating content that had already been posted. I was pre-approving content that was about to be streamed live. My approval was what allowed these broadcasts to go public. I started paying closer attention to the content coming through my queue. Mixed in with normal reported posts were these live feeds from empty rooms, industrial settings, medical equipment, restraints, each one tagged with metadata showing thousands of waiting viewers, and each one requiring my approval before it could broadcast. I was essentially the gatekeeper for what I was beginning to suspect were preparation streams for red rooms. I tried to refuse approval for one of these feeds, marking it as violating guidelines for depicting implements that could be used for harm. Within an hour, I received a call from my supervisor. They reminded me that I was still in my probationary period and that my approval rates had been flagged as concerning. Too many rejections could result in immediate termination. But they also said something that chilled me. They mentioned that they had my address, my banking details, my emergency contacts, standard information for any employer, of course. But the way they referenced it felt like a veiled threat, like they wanted me to know how easy it would be to find me if I became a problem. I kept approving the feeds. What choice did I have? I needed the work, and I convinced myself that maybe I was wrong about what I was seeing. Maybe these were just art projects or horror film sets. Maybe the viewer counts were inflated. Maybe I was letting the stress of the job make me paranoid. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. A new type of content started coming through my queue. Not just empty rooms anymore, but rooms with people in them. People who looked unconscious or restrained. People who weren't acting. People who looked genuinely terrified when they were conscious. The metadata on these streams showed view accounts in the tens of thousands, chat functions that were active with comments I couldn't read, but that seemed to be taking requests or making suggestions. Payment information showing cryptocurrency transactions happening in real time. I couldn't approve them. I just couldn't. I started marking them all as violations, knowing it would flag my performance, but unable to live with myself if I didn't. For 3 days, I rejected every single one of these streams that came through my queue. On the 4th day, I received another package at my house. I hadn't ordered anything, and there was no delivery note. Inside was a tablet computer that automatically connected to a network when I turned it on. The screen showed a live feed of my own bedroom, taken from the camera on the work computer SafeNet had provided. I was looking at myself looking at the tablet. A message appeared on the tablet screen. You've been very thorough in your moderating work. Time for a performance review. Below it was a link to another stream, one showing an empty room with a metal table in the center. In the corner of the screen was a viewer counter, already showing thousands of people waiting, and a countdown timer set for 2 weeks from that day. I packed immediately and left Birmingham that night. I've been moving around England since then, staying in different hotels, buying train tickets with cash, avoiding CCTV when possible. But they keep finding me. Notes left in hotel rooms, messages sent to new phone numbers I've bought, photos of me taken in public places that get sent to whatever device I'm using. The most disturbing realization is that SafeNet Solutions isn't what I thought it was. It's not a company fighting against harmful content. It's a company facilitating it. They use legitimate content moderation as cover for something much darker. The majority of moderators probably are genuine, reviewing normal social media posts. But some of us, selected for particular reasons, were unknowingly gatekeeping for red room broadcasts. I think about how many streams I approved over those 4 months. How many people were harmed because I clicked approve on their preparatory footage. How many victims suffered because I was too concerned about keeping my job to ask harder questions about what I was really moderating. Last week, I tried going to the police in 3 different cities. The evidence I have is circumstantial. Screenshots, metadata, the tablet they sent me. But when I tried to describe the situation, it sounds like the paranoid delusions of someone who spent too much time looking at disturbing content. They take reports, but I can tell they think I'm either lying or having a mental health crisis. The countdown on the tablet now shows less than 2 days remaining. The viewer count has grown to tens of thousands. I've started receiving more specific messages about when and where I need to be. An address in Liverpool, a time, consequences for my family if I don't comply. And they've proven they know exactly where my sister lives, where my elderly parents shop, which route my niece takes to school. I've come to understand that the entire system is designed to implicate people who work for them. Every piece of content I approved created a digital trail connecting me to these broadcasts. Every rejection I made after discovering the truth could be used as evidence that I knew what was happening, but participated anyway. I'm not just a target now. I'm a liability who knows too much about their operation. The most terrifying part is realizing how vast this network must be. How many other content moderation companies might be fronts for similar operations. How many people think they're doing honest work cleaning up the internet when they're actually facilitating its darkest corners? I keep wondering if any of my colleagues at SafeNet knew what we were really doing. Were some of them complicit from the beginning? Were others like me, gradually drawn into something they didn't understand until it was too late? Or am I the only one who stumbled across this particular stream of content? The tablet just chimed with a new notification. The message is simple. Final preparations complete. Transport details being sent to your current location. I'm in a service station cafe somewhere between Leicester and Nottingham, trying to disappear into the crowd, but somehow they still know exactly where I am. I'm going to post this and then ditch the tablet somewhere. Maybe throw it in a bin, maybe leave it on the train. I don't know if it will make any difference. I don't know if anyone will believe this account, or if they'll dismiss it as the ramblings of someone who's lost touch with reality. But if you're working in content moderation, especially for smaller companies or remote positions, pay attention to what you're really approving. Ask questions about the metadata you can access. Notice patterns in the content. And if something feels wrong, trust that instinct even if it cost you the job. I thought I was making the internet safer. Instead, I was helping to make it infinitely more dangerous for the most vulnerable people. Every approval was another step toward this moment, when I become the content instead of the moderator. The countdown shows approximately 30 hours remaining. Thousands of people are waiting to watch what happens next. And somewhere in Liverpool, a room is being prepared for tomorrow night's broadcast. I should have asked more questions from the beginning. Should have trusted my instincts about those first strange videos. Should have realized that a job that seemed too good to be true probably was. But it's too late for should-haves now. The only thing left is to run and hope that somehow I can break free from a system I helped maintain, without ever understanding what it really was. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent months deciding what content was safe for public consumption. Now thousands of people are waiting to consume content featuring me. The moderator has become the moderated. What if I told you that clicking on the wrong link could change everything you thought you knew about human nature? That somewhere beneath the surface of the internet you use every day, there are spaces where the worst impulses of humanity play out in real time, watched by ordinary people who've stumbled too far down the rabbit hole. I'm a marketing consultant from Manchester. Nothing particularly exciting about my life. I help small businesses figure out their online presence, manage their social media, that sort of thing. Last autumn, between clients, I found myself with too much time and a dangerous amount of curiosity about the parts of the internet I'd only heard whispered about in tech forums. It started with a legitimate research project. One of my clients had been targeted by online harassment, and I wanted to understand how these campaigns typically operated. Someone mentioned that the real coordination often happened on the dark web, away from the scrutiny of mainstream platforms. Setting up Tor felt like crossing a line I shouldn't cross, but I told myself it was just research, professional development. The first few weeks were disappointing, to be honest. Mostly just drug markets and forums discussing things that would get you arrested if you posted them on Facebook. The whole thing felt less sinister than I'd expected, more like a slightly seedy car boot sale than the digital underworld I'd imagined. But then I started hearing about red rooms. The concept seemed absurd at first. Live streams where viewers could supposedly watch and influence violent acts happening in real time. Most people I encountered online dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes, digital urban legends designed to part gullible people from their Bitcoin. The technical challenges alone made it seem implausible. The bandwidth limitations of anonymity networks, the difficulty of maintaining stable connections, the enormous resources required to operate such services without getting caught. Yet some users insisted they'd encountered the real thing. They described details that seemed too specific to be complete fabrications. Hidden payment systems using obscure cryptocurrencies, invitation-only access requiring vouchers from existing members, sophisticated streaming infrastructure that somehow worked despite the limitations of anonymous networks. My professional instincts kicked in. How would someone actually build such a system? What kind of technical infrastructure would be required? It became a puzzle I couldn't let go. The same way I might obsess over a particularly challenging marketing campaign or branding problem. The research consumed my evenings for months. I learned about cryptocurrency mixing services, about layered VPN systems, about streaming protocols designed for unreliable connections. I discovered communities where people discussed theoretical approaches to anonymous video distribution, always careful to frame everything as academic security research. Around Christmas time, I found something that changed the trajectory of my investigation entirely. It was buried in a discussion about experimental streaming technology, presented not as anything sinister, but as a demonstration of new protocols designed for secure communications. The poster claimed it was a proof of concept for a system that could work in authoritarian countries with heavy internet censorship. The link led to a sparse login page. No branding, no explanation, just username and password fields. Below that, a note indicating that new accounts required an invitation code from an existing member. I should have closed that browser tab immediately. Instead, I spent the better part of January trying to work out how to get access. The breakthrough came through my legitimate work. I'd been helping a small cybersecurity firm with their content marketing, writing blog posts about privacy tools and network security. One of their consultants, someone I'd worked with on several projects, sent me a private message asking if I'd be interested in beta testing a new streaming platform designed for privacy-conscious users. The timing felt like more than coincidence. I accepted. The authentication process was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Beyond basic credentials, the system required verification through a custom application that generated time-sensitive codes. It reminded me of the security systems used by online banking, the kind of multi-factor authentication you'd expect from financial institutions. When I finally gained access, I was struck by how professional everything looked. Clean interface design, intuitive navigation, the kind of user experience you'd expect from a legitimate streaming service. There was a list of available channels on the left, chat functionality on the right, and a video player dominating the center of the screen. Most channels appeared to be offline. The active ones had cryptic titles, usually just random combinations of letters and numbers. Viewer counts were relatively low, rarely more than 50 or 60 people. The chat sections were mostly empty, with only occasional messages in languages I couldn't identify. I clicked on one of the active channels. The video quality was poor, as expected through anonymity networks, pixelated, choppy, with noticeable delays. It took several seconds to understand what I was looking at. A small room with concrete walls, lit by harsh fluorescent lighting. In the center, a metal chair with someone sitting in it. The person appeared unconscious or heavily sedated. Their head lolled forward, unresponsive to sounds coming from somewhere off camera. The chat section remained empty except for automated system messages noting the timestamp. I watched for perhaps 15 minutes, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The person didn't move. No one entered the frame. The chat stayed silent. Eventually, I switched to another channel. The second stream showed what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Concrete floors, rusted metal fixtures, industrial lighting casting harsh shadows. The camera was positioned to show the entire space, but like the first stream, nothing happened while I watched. No movement, no sound, no activity in the associated chat. Over the following hours, I sampled roughly a dozen different channels. Most showed similar scenes: empty rooms, unconscious or restrained individuals, industrial or basement settings. The production values varied dramatically. Some appeared professional, with multiple camera angles and clear audio. Others looked like amateur recordings from mobile phones or cheap webcams. What struck me most was the absence of the interaction I'd expected. Despite claims that these platforms allowed viewer participation, I saw no evidence of real-time control or influence. No voting mechanisms, no polling systems, no way for viewers to communicate with whoever was operating the streams. The chat functions existed but remained largely unused. I began to suspect I was looking at elaborate recordings rather than live content. The technical limitations that skeptics had pointed out seemed valid. Maintaining stable, interactive video streams through anonymity networks would require significant resources and expertise. Perhaps these were pre-recorded videos designed to create the illusion of live participation. But then I discovered a channel that shattered that assumption completely. The title was different from the others. Not random characters, but actual words. Fulfillment Session 47. The viewer count was significantly higher, over 100 people. The chat section showed active messages, though they were mostly numbers and brief phrases that meant nothing to me initially. The video showed a residential setting rather than the industrial spaces I'd seen before. Someone's sitting room, complete with furniture, decorations, family photographs on the mantelpiece. It looked normal, comfortable, like any middle-class British home you might visit. A person sat on the sofa, facing the camera directly. Unlike the unconscious subjects in other streams, this individual was alert, making eye contact with the lens. They appeared nervous but not panicked, as if they understood what was about to happen and had somehow accepted their situation. The chat suddenly exploded with activity. Messages appeared rapidly, too fast for me to read them all. Numbers, coordinates, simple commands. Most were in English, but I recognized fragments of other European languages mixed throughout. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The timestamp on one of the chat messages matched exactly the time showing on my computer clock. Not approximately, precisely, down to the second. These weren't pre-recorded videos. This was happening right now, in real time. Someone entered the frame from the left side of the screen. They wore dark clothing with their face obscured, but their movements seemed deliberate, controlled. They approached the person on the sofa and handed them what appeared to be a sheet of paper. The person read whatever was written there. Their expression transformed from nervous to genuinely terrified. They started to rise from the sofa, but the masked figure placed a hand on their shoulder, gently but firmly guiding them back down. The chat messages became more frequent and specific. I began to understand that they weren't just comments, they were instructions. The numbers corresponded to locations within the room. The brief phrases were commands for actions to be performed. The viewers weren't just watching, they were directing what happened next. The person on the sofa looked directly at the camera again, and I realized with growing horror that they could see us. Not individually, but they knew we were there, watching, participating. Their eyes held a desperate pleading that I'd never witnessed before in any film or television program. I slammed the laptop shut immediately. For nearly a week, I avoided my computer entirely, except for essential work tasks. I told myself it had been an elaborate hoax, a piece of performance art designed to disturb people like me who'd wandered into spaces we had no business exploring. The production values had been too polished, the technical execution too smooth. Surely real criminal operations don't invest that kind of effort into user experience design. But I couldn't stop thinking about that timestamp, the perfect synchronization between the chat messages and my system clock, the way the person on the sofa had looked through the camera, as if they could see directly to the people watching on the other side. After 4 days, I began checking local news websites obsessively. Missing persons reports, unexplained incidents, anything that might connect to what I'd witnessed. I found nothing, which should have been reassuring but somehow made everything worse. I never returned to that platform. I uninstalled Tor, deleted the cryptocurrency wallets I'd created during my research, reformatted my hard drive multiple times. I changed all my passwords, switched to new email providers, even replaced my router with a different model from a different manufacturer. But the questions remained. Had I witnessed something real, or had I been subjected to an elaborate psychological experiment? How do you verify something that exists entirely in the shadows, that leaves no trace in the legitimate world? 8 months have passed since then. I've attempted to return to my normal routine, focusing on client work, avoiding the darker corners of the internet entirely. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm working on a campaign or reviewing analytics, I'll notice the timestamp in the corner of my screen and remember that moment of perfect synchronization. The worst part isn't wondering whether what I saw was real. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, other people are still watching, still participating, still directing what happens to individuals whose faces they'll never be able to forget. And sometimes I wonder if there's a record somewhere of everyone who accessed that platform, everyone who watched what I watched, everyone who closed their laptops at the crucial moment. Whether my name is on a list, whether someone, somewhere, is still keeping track. I've become more paranoid about online security since then. I monitor my network traffic regularly, check my systems for unusual activity, maintain better operational security practices than any marketing consultant has any reason to need. Not because I'm doing anything wrong now, but because I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, might still be watching me. The internet feels fundamentally different now. Every click, every page load, every moment of connectivity carries the weight of knowing what's possible in the spaces between legitimate websites. The surface web that most people know is exactly that, a surface concealing depths that most people never imagine exist. I still work in marketing. I still help businesses establish their online presence, manage their digital communications, build their brands. But now I understand that the threats aren't just technical or competitive, they're human. And the people who operate in those hidden spaces have resources, expertise, and motivations that go far beyond what most of us can comprehend. Sometimes I receive emails from technology companies, invitations to test new privacy tools, requests to review anonymity-focused platforms. I delete them immediately without reading past the subject line. I've learned that curiosity, even professional curiosity, can lead you to places you can never truly leave behind. The person on that sofa is still out there somewhere, or they're not. I'll never know which, and that uncertainty follows me through every day, every project, every quiet moment when I'm alone with my thoughts and my computer screen. That's the real horror of it all. Not knowing becomes its own kind of prison, and the people who build these systems understand that perfectly. They know that witnesses are bound by their complicity, that knowledge becomes a burden too heavy to share with anyone who might actually be able to help. I've never told anyone about this experience. Not friends, not family, not the police. Who would believe it? And what would I tell them? That I found something on the dark web that might have been real. That I watched something I shouldn't have watched and then fled. But I'm telling you now, and I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps because the weight of keeping it secret has become unbearable. Perhaps because I hope that sharing it will somehow make it less real, less immediate, less present in my daily thoughts. Or perhaps because I've started to suspect that the real purpose of those streams isn't the content itself. Perhaps it's creating witnesses, people who carry the knowledge of what's possible, who spread that knowledge through whispers and implications and stories that can never be properly verified. Perhaps I'm doing exactly what they intended me to do all along. I never considered myself tech-savvy. Just average, really. I could navigate basic computer functions, use standard software, and handle simple troubleshooting. Nothing special. My job as a data entry specialist for a medical billing company required minimal technical skills, mostly just inputting codes and numbers into pre-designed systems. Monotonous work, but it paid the bills. My roommate Eli was the tech expert between us. Computer science major, spent his free time coding and discussing cybersecurity on forums. Always had 3 monitors running simultaneously, all displaying things I couldn't begin to understand. When our internet connection slowed down for the 3rd time in a month, Eli decided to upgrade our router and reconfigure our home network. That's when everything changed. While setting up the new security features, Eli discovered unusual traffic patterns originating from our IP address. Late-night data transfers, connections to unfamiliar servers, encrypted packets being sent at regular intervals, all happening when both of us should have been asleep. The timestamps showed activity between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. almost every night for the past 6 weeks. I assured him it wasn't me. My laptop was basic and mainly used for streaming shows and occasionally working from home. Eli checked my system anyway, running diagnostic tools I'd never heard of. That's when he found the hidden partition on my hard drive. According to Eli, someone had remotely accessed my laptop and created a separate storage area invisible to standard file explorers. Inside was a Tor browser installation, cryptocurrency wallet software, and a folder containing what appeared to be encryption keys. The browser history showed regular visits to .onion domains, dark web addresses unreachable through normal browsers. The most frequently visited site was something called the Observatory. My first instinct was to wipe the laptop completely, but Eli advised against it. This was evidence of a serious security breach, possibly even criminal activity being conducted through my device. We needed to understand what was happening before eliminating the evidence. Eli suggested setting up monitoring software to see what happened during those late-night sessions. If someone was remotely accessing my laptop, we could capture information about them. For the next 3 nights, we left my laptop powered on, but disconnected from the internet. Nothing happened. On the 4th night, Eli configured it to record screen activity while allowing internet access again. We both slept in his room rather than mine, my laptop left on my desk, its webcam covered with electrical tape just to be safe. The next morning, we reviewed the recordings. At 2:17 a.m., my laptop woke from sleep mode without any physical interaction. The screen displayed the Tor browser launching automatically, connecting to the network, then navigating to an address consisting of random letters and numbers ending in .onion. A login screen appeared, and credentials were entered automatically from saved data. Then the screen went black except for a simple interface, a video player, a chat window, and a timer counting down from 90 minutes. The video showed an empty room with plain walls. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened on screen. The chat window occasionally flashed with new messages. but they were in a language neither of us recognized. At the 22-minute mark, a person entered the frame. They wore ordinary clothes, but had their face digitally blurred, not covered, but processed to be unrecognizable. They sat in a chair facing the camera and held up a digital tablet displaying that day's date and time. For the next hour, the person simply sat there while messages continued appearing in the chat. Occasionally, they would shift position slightly or check the tablet. Nothing dramatic occurred. Then, at the 83-minute mark, the person stood up, approached the camera, and adjusted it to pan around the room, revealing a second chair that had previously been out of frame. The person returned to their original position, and the feed continued until the timer reached 0. Then the browser closed automatically, and the laptop returned to sleep mode. Eli was convinced we were witnessing some kind of scam operation. His theory was that someone had compromised my laptop to use it as a proxy for accessing the dark web, specifically to participate in what appeared to be paid viewings of some underground content. The mundane nature of what we'd seen was puzzling, but Eli explained that dark web red rooms were largely considered urban myths, purported live streams of extreme content that most cybersecurity experts dismissed as scams designed to steal cryptocurrency. We agreed to monitor for one more night before wiping the system and implementing stronger security measures. That night followed the same pattern, except the room shown in the video feed contained both chairs from the start, both empty. After 17 minutes, a person entered, same blurred face effect, and sat in one chair. They held up the tablet with the date and time, then set it aside. The chat window became more active. At the 36-minute mark, a second person entered the frame and sat in the other chair. Their face was similarly blurred. They held up no tablet, made no introductions. Both figures simply sat facing the camera while the chat continued to fill with messages. At the 54-minute mark, both figures stood simultaneously. The first approached the camera and adjusted it again, panning to show more of the room. In the corner, barely visible, was a third chair. The figures returned to their seats. The feed continued until the timer expired. The pattern was clear now. Each night added a new chair, revealed at some point during the broadcast. Eli was still convinced it was an elaborate scam, but couldn't explain the purpose. If someone was paying to watch this, what were they getting for their money? We decided to monitor one more night before taking action. The third recording began the same way. 3 chairs visible from the start, 3 blurred figures entering at different times, each holding up the tablet with the date and time. The chat window was more active than previous nights. At the 62-minute mark, all 3 figures stood, and one adjusted the camera to reveal a 4th chair in the corner of the room. Unlike the others, this chair had restraints attached to the armrests and legs. That was enough. The next morning, Eli helped me completely wipe my laptop, reinstall the operating system, and set up advanced security measures. We changed our network configuration, implemented strict firewalls, and Eli even installed monitoring software on our router to alert us to any unusual traffic patterns. For good measure, I started shutting down my laptop completely at night and storing it in a drawer. A week passed without incident. No strange connections, no unexplained data transfers. It seemed the problem had been resolved. Eli's theory was that my laptop had been randomly targeted by a botnet, compromised through some vulnerability in my outdated security software. The whole Red Room business was likely just a scam targeting people on the dark web, convincing them to pay cryptocurrency to watch increasingly elaborate, but ultimately fake exclusive content. Then I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply "Observation continues." The body contained only an attached image file. Against better judgment, I opened it. The image showed my bedroom, taken from the perspective of my laptop's webcam. The timestamp in the corner showed a date from the previous night at exactly 2:17 a.m. My laptop had been shut down and in a drawer at that time. I showed the email to Eli, who examined the metadata and confirmed the timestamp hadn't been altered. He checked my laptop again, but found no evidence of any compromise or activation. It was as if the image had been taken by a device that wasn't there. That night, we set up a separate camera in my room, positioned to monitor the drawer where I kept my laptop. The recording showed nothing unusual. No one entered the room. The drawer remained closed all night. Yet the next morning, I received another email with another image of my bedroom at 2:17 a.m., taken from the exact same webcam angle, despite my laptop being securely stored away. Eli suggested staying somewhere else for a few days while he conducted a more thorough investigation of our apartment. I arranged to stay with a colleague and packed enough clothes for a week. Before leaving, I removed the battery from my laptop entirely, rendering it incapable of any function. 3 days into my stay at my colleague's place, another email arrived. Same subject line, same format. The attached image showed me sleeping in my colleague's guest room. The angle was identical to where a laptop webcam would be positioned, if there had been a laptop in the room, which there wasn't. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. from the previous night. I returned home immediately, finding Eli surrounded by dismantled electronics. He had been systematically checking every device in our apartment for hidden cameras or unknown surveillance equipment. He found nothing unusual until he examined my old laptop battery that I had removed and left behind. According to him, it had been modified to include a small cellular modem, a component that could maintain a connection to the internet independently of the laptop itself, allowing for remote access even when the computer appeared to be completely powered down. This discovery prompted a more thorough investigation. Eli removed the battery from his own laptop and examined it, finding a similar modification. Further checks revealed that our router, which Eli had purchased online 6 months earlier, contained custom firmware that differed from the manufacturer's specifications. Even our smart TV had been modified to allow remote access to its integrated camera. The implications were clear. Our entire apartment had been compromised, not randomly, but with deliberate and sophisticated precision. Someone had methodically created a surveillance network within our living space, using our own devices against us. Eli contacted a cybersecurity professional he knew from his university, who agreed to examine our equipment. Their conclusion was disturbing. The modifications were professional grade, suggesting resources and expertise beyond typical hackers. The cellular modems in our batteries connected to private networks rather than commercial carriers, making them virtually untraceable. Most concerning was the discovery that these modifications had been in place for at least 8 months, far longer than the 6 weeks of suspicious network activity we had initially detected. We moved out of the apartment the following week, found separate places, disposed of all our electronics, purchased new devices from physical stores rather than online. I changed jobs, started using cash instead of cards whenever possible, and implemented every privacy measure recommended by Eli's security contact. 3 months passed without incident. No strange emails, no unexplained images. Life began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though I still covered any webcam with tape and stored my devices in a signal-blocking pouch at night. Then, last week, I received a package at my new address, an address I had shared with very few people. Inside was a brand new laptop, still sealed in its factory packaging. No note, no return address. I left it untouched and contacted Eli, who arranged for his cybersecurity contact to examine it in a controlled environment. The laptop was factory sealed and appeared completely normal upon initial inspection. The operating system was a standard installation with no obvious modifications. It was only when they disassembled the device that they discovered the anomaly, a custom component integrated into the motherboard, virtually indistinguishable from the original parts unless you knew exactly what to look for. According to the security expert, this component would have allowed remote activation of the laptop, even when powered off. More disturbing was their assessment that this wasn't an aftermarket modification. It had been integrated during the manufacturing process, which should have been impossible without inside access to the production facility. Yesterday, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only a time, 2:17 a.m. I didn't sleep last night. Instead, I sat in the dark of my new apartment, watching the clock. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every electronic device I owned, my new phone, my replacement laptop, my smart TV, turned on simultaneously, screens displaying the same image. An empty room with 5 chairs arranged in a semicircle. 4 were occupied by figures with blurred faces. The 5th chair, positioned in the center, remained empty. The screens displayed this image for exactly 1 minute before shutting off. I've since disconnected everything, removed batteries, cut power to my apartment. I'm writing this at a public library on a computer that has no connection to me. When I finish, I'm leaving the city, maybe the country. I don't know who these observers are or what they want. I don't know how they've managed to integrate themselves into devices that should be secure, or how they tracked me to my new location. What I do know is that the chairs in that room have been increasing by 1 each night, and the newest chair, the empty one, is meant for me. The most terrifying realization isn't that they're watching, it's that they're waiting. Each night at 2:17 a.m., a broadcast goes live somewhere on the dark web. People pay to watch, to participate in whatever this is. And somehow, through means I can't understand, I've moved from being an unwitting proxy in their observation network to being the subject of their observation itself. If you're reading this and suddenly find your devices behaving strangely, or discover unexplained network activity in the early morning hours, don't make the mistake I made. Don't investigate. Don't monitor. Don't try to understand. Just run. I haven't told my girlfriend this, not my family nor the police, definitely not the police. So I'm 29. I work in IT consulting in Birmingham. There's nothing special about my life really. I've got a decent flat, been with my girlfriend for 3 years, and I hang out with the same group of friends I've known since uni. My job is mostly remote troubleshooting for corporate clients, which is basically me spending all day on video calls telling executives how to restart their computers or find files they've misplaced. My friend Mark and I go way back to our first year at uni, where we both did computer science. He was always the one taking risks. While I went into boring corporate IT, he got into cybersecurity and now does penetration testing for a living. Basically, companies pay him to hack into their systems to find weaknesses. We don't work in the same field anymore, but we still game online most weeks and grab a pint when we can. So this Friday night in March, we're doing our usual thing, playing some online games. My girlfriend was away at her sister's for the weekend. Around 10, after a few rounds, Mark says he wants to show me something he found during a job. Nothing unusual there. He's always sending me weird coding stuff or security things he discovers. We switched to screen sharing on our voice chat. His desktop was a mess as usual, about 50 windows open because he never closes anything. He dug through some folders, then got all serious, asking if I was ready to see something intense. I laughed it off, thinking he was being dramatic about some security hole he'd found or something. That was just Mark's way, always making tech discoveries sound like he'd found buried treasure. He opened up this weird browser I didn't recognize. Not Chrome or anything normal, something with a bare bones interface. When I asked about it, he said it was for accessing the dark web, all configured with security stuff and anonymizing features. That got my attention. I mean, I knew what the dark web was, that hidden part of the internet, where all the dodgy stuff happens. But I'd never had any reason to go there myself. Mark explained that during a job, he'd found some login credentials that led him into some pretty dark places online. He'd found what he called mind-blowing, some live streaming site that showed reality without filters. The way he described it, I thought maybe it was just some extreme version of reality TV or banned content too graphic for YouTube or something. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off. Mark's usually pretty chilled, but that night he had this weird energy, like nervous, but excited at the same time. Not like him at all. But I didn't think much of it then, just went along, because I was curious what had got him so worked up. He went through a bunch of login screens and eventually got to this site. Black background, red text, very basic looking. It was set up kind of like Netflix, with thumbnails for different channels. Most were dark or just showing shadows, but one was active with what looked like a brightly lit room. Mark clicked on it and it filled the screen. What I saw was what looked like a basement or warehouse. Concrete walls, super bright, harsh lighting. In the middle was a bloke tied to a chair, blindfolded. Standing next to him was someone in dark clothes, wearing one of those plain white masks you see in horror films. My first thought was, this is some low-budget horror film or haunted house live stream. It looked staged, you know? Too perfect, like a film set. I made some joke about how bad the production was, but Mark didn't laugh. Instead, he pointed to a chat window where people with weird usernames were posting comments and what looked like requests for things to happen. Mark then told me, dead serious, that this was called a red room, a live stream of actual torture or violence that people paid to watch and sometimes even control. I told him to shut it off, that it had to be fake, that nobody would be stupid enough to broadcast themselves committing actual crimes. He insisted it was real, that he'd checked with some security contacts, and that this stream was apparently one of the trusted ones in these circles. The fact he used the word trusted for something like this made me feel sick. I was about to disconnect when the person in the mask walked over to the guy in the chair and took off his blindfold. The bloke blinked in the bright light, looking around, and when I saw his face clearly, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I knew him. Not well, he wasn't a mate or family or anything, but definitely someone from my everyday life. He was the barista at the coffee shop near my office. I stopped there almost every morning. We weren't friends exactly, but we had that familiar thing you get with someone you see regularly. He always remembered my order, sometimes recommended new coffees. We'd chat about the weather or whatever. He'd mentioned once that he was working to save up for uni, and now here he was, tied up in what Mark was saying was a red room. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost on our video call, because Mark asked if I was okay. Without thinking, I blurted out that I knew the guy on screen. Mark laughed at first, thinking I was joking. When I insisted, telling him exactly who it was and how I knew him, Mark's face went completely white. He suddenly seemed to realize what this meant. Either this was some crazy coincidence, or somehow the people running this stream were in the same city as me. Then things got really freaky. The chat on the stream suddenly went crazy. People started posting messages asking if someone had recognized the subject, if there had been a security breach. I realized with absolute horror that our conversation was somehow being monitored. Either Mark's computer was compromised, or the streaming site had access to our voice chat. Mark started frantically trying to close the browser, but it froze up. Messages kept appearing in the chat, now directly addressing the viewer who knows the subject. One user with an admin tag posted coordinates that were scarily close to my neighborhood. Mark ended the screen share and hung up on our call. I tried calling straight back, but he didn't answer. A few minutes later, I got a text from him, telling me to turn off all my devices, not to contact him again, and to stay somewhere else that night. He said his system had been compromised, and whoever was running the stream now had info on both of us. I stayed at a hotel that night, paid cash, kept checking the news for anything about kidnappings or murders. Next morning, I went to the coffee shop, heart pounding the whole time. The barista was there, completely normal, serving customers like nothing had happened. He greeted me like usual, same as any other day. For a minute, I felt this massive relief. Maybe it was all fake, a prank, a lookalike, something like that. I actually managed to convince myself of this until I got back to my flat that afternoon and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a photo, a screenshot from our video call, showing my face exactly at the moment when I recognized the barista. On the back, written in red ink, "Viewers become participants eventually." I haven't heard from Mark since. His social media disappeared a few days later. Our mutual friends told me he suddenly quit his job and moved abroad. The barista worked at the coffee shop for about another week, then just vanished. According to his co-workers, he didn't give notice or anything, just stopped showing up. I've moved flats, changed my phone number, set up new online accounts, got security cameras, take different routes to work every day, but I never feel safe. Every night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I keep seeing that moment when I recognized him, and I can't stop thinking about how these people know exactly who I am and where to find me. The worst part is not knowing. Was this whole thing set up? Did they deliberately pick someone from my daily life, knowing I'd be watching? Or was it just some horrible coincidence that of all the people they could have grabbed, they took someone I would recognize? I honestly don't know which is worse, that I randomly stumbled across this nightmare, or that I was the target all along.